It began with mist clinging to the marshes, thick enough to blur the horizon into something uncertain and colourless. Just days after the landings on the beaches of Normandy, the fields south of Utah Beach did not feel like victory. They felt eerie, damp, and waiting, as if the land itself held its breath. Tall grass swayed gently in morning wind. Streams wound through low, soft ground. Wooden farmhouses leaned under grey skies. And across that fragile landscape, a quiet tension gathered like a storm with no thunder. Carentan was out there, not far, not hidden, a small town with narrow streets, shuttered windows, and stone walls that seemed too old and too stubborn to care who claimed them. It was just a name on a map to some, a crossroads to others, a doorway between beaches that needed to become a single, connected front. Without Carentan, Utah and Omaha beaches would remain isolated pockets. With Carentan, the Allies could build momentum that might crack open the entire German defence in Normandy, but Carentan was protected not by distance, but by earth, mud, and water. The Duvet River curled across the land like a barrier drawn by nature itself. Marshes thickened around its edges, swallowing footsteps, clinging to boots, slowing movements to a crawl. Bridges had been blown, roads drowned under tides, the moon dragged in and out with quiet cruelty. And somewhere beyond those marshes, German paratroopers waited, men trained in discipline, precision, and the art of holding ground, no matter the cost. The American airborne units who marched toward Carentan did so with bodies still aching from the chaos of D-Day night drops. Some had landed miles from their objectives, some had fought alone in dark hedgerows, some hadn't slept more than a handful of minutes since stepping out of their aircraft into the cold wind of early June. Their uniforms were damp, their boots soaked, their nerves stretched thin, and yet they pushed forward. They crossed causeways barely wide enough for single-file movement. They trudged through flooded fields, where each step sank deep into mud that smelled of rot and salt. They moved across planks laid hurriedly over waterlogged ground. They scanned every farmhouse, every clump of trees, every bend in the road for hidden threats. The first shots came quietly. A crack through the morning haze, a burst of fire from behind a hedgerow, then another, and another. Silence vanished. The marshes came alive with echoes of battle. German paratroopers fought with a fierce determination, sharpened by months spent defending Normandy. Their machine guns swept across the open approaches, their rifles picked targets one by one, their mortars traced arcs through the sky that ended in mud and water and cries of pain. Every advance toward Carentan felt like pushing through a world designed to punish any misstep. The Americans pressed on. They crawled along ditch lines where cold water reached their chins. They sprinted across open patches of ground where bullets tore through grass in sharp, violent lines. They charged positions hidden behind hedges that stood thick as walls. They fought house to house, orchard to orchard, bridge to bridge. And finally, the fields gave way to the edge of the town itself. Carentan was not large, but it was dense, twisting streets, low stone houses, windows that framed rifles, intersections that could become killing zones in seconds. The first troops entering the town felt the weight of every shadow. Boots clacked on cobblestones slick with early morning dew. Doors stood ajar, dark interiors hiding unseen threats. Smoke drifted through alleys where previous firefights left scars on walls. Then the battle erupted again, closer now, louder, raw. Grenades bounced across stones. Machine guns roared from windows. Paratroopers dashed from doorway to doorway. Rifles cracked from rooftops. Shells exploded against the outskirts of town, shaking the ground beneath their feet. Carentan became a maze of fear and courage woven together, every corner a new test, every room a new confrontation. The air filled with dust and splintered wood. The smell of cordite lingered in the narrow lanes. Voices shouted, commands drowned by gunfire. Men fought for meters, for seconds, for survival. And slowly, painfully, the Americans carved their way through the town. By the time Carentan fell, the soldiers were beyond exhaustion. Their uniforms torn, their boots covered in mud and blood, their faces streaked with sweat and grime, their bodies shaking not from fear anymore, but from sheer depletion. But the road between Utah and Omaha was finally open. Tonight, we return to that battle, to the fields drowned in water, to the causeways stretching over uncertainty, to the narrow streets of Carentan, where footsteps echoed between bursts of gunfire. We return to the moment where two distant beaches finally became one front, and where victory demanded not glory, but grit, the slow, grinding, unglamorous kind that defines real history. Before we go deeper, I want to ask you something gentle, something in your own voice. Where in the world are you listening from tonight, and what hour lies quietly around you? Is it just past dusk where you are, or late enough that the world feels hushed and still? And something deeper, unique to this story, Carentan teaches us that sometimes the hardest paths are the ones where the ground itself seems to resist every step. In your own life, has there been a moment when you kept going even though everything around you made it difficult? If it feels right, share what that taught you. And if these long, slow journeys into the past help you breathe a little deeper, settle your thoughts, or drift towards sleep, consider subscribing. March 1944, a stone office in occupied Normandy, 3 months before the world will change. Colonel Friedrich von der Heide spreads a topographical map across his desk, running his fingers along the lines that mark roads, rivers, and the thin, elevated causeways threading through marshland. He circles one town with his red pencil, pressing hard enough that the point nearly tears through the paper. In neat Germanic script, he writes 4 words that will haunt both sides for years to come. Hier ist der Schlüssel. Here is the key. The town is Carentan, population 4,120 souls, a market centre where Norman farmers have sold butter and cattle for 8 centuries. Most Allied planners have never heard its name. Those who have think of it as a footnote, a minor objective to be secured sometime after the beaches are taken, after the immediate crisis passes. Von der Heide knows better. He understands what the maps reveal, that this unremarkable French town sits at the centre of everything. Between Utah Beach to the west and Omaha Beach to the east lies an 8-mile gap, and Carentan sits directly in the middle of that gap like a cork in a bottle. Whoever controls this town controls whether the invasion succeeds or collapses into 2 isolated beachheads that can be defeated separately. 2 months later, May 1944, a different room, a different map. General Omar Bradley stands before his corps commanders in England, pointer in hand. The invasion plan sprawls across the wall in coloured pins and arrows. Bradley taps the gap between his landing zones, and every officer in the room leans forward. "Gentlemen," he says, letting the silence stretch, "if we don't take this town, we don't have a beachhead. We have 2 separate invasions." He doesn't need to explain what that means. 2 isolated forces can be contained, compressed, potentially driven back into the sea. History is full of failed amphibious assaults. Gallipoli, Dieppe. One town stands between D-Day and those names. The geography tells the story before the first shot is ever fired. Carentan sits in a bowl of marshland, surrounded by the Duvet and Meurthe rivers that the Germans have deliberately flooded. 7 causeways, narrow elevated roads, barely 12 to 18 feet wide, are the only approaches. Each causeway stretches 600 to 1,200 yards across water 3 to 6 feet deep, with no cover, no concealment, perfect killing zones. 4 stone bridges control the routes in and out. The town itself is classic Norman construction. Thick-walled stone buildings, narrow streets, cellars that connect beneath the cobblestones. It is a defender's paradise and an attacker's nightmare. Von der Heide has spent months preparing, converting every sturdy building into a strong point, positioning machine guns to create interlocking fields of fire, registering mortar coordinates on every bridge and intersection. June 1st, 1944. A French resistance courier moves through Carentan with a camera hidden in her market basket. She photographs German reinforcement schedules, supply convoys, unit insignia. The images she risks her life to capture show something that will change Allied calculations. Elements of the 17th SS Panzer Grenadier Division moving into positions east of Carentan. Elite troops, not the exhausted, demoralized Wehrmacht of propaganda films, but young volunteers with combat experience from the Eastern Front. The intelligence reaches England too late to change the invasion plan. The assault will proceed as scheduled, but now the defenders will be stronger than expected, and the reinforcements closer than hoped. The original Allied timetable seems almost naive in retrospect. Carentan is to be captured by D+3, June 9th, just 3 days after the beaches are secured. The plan assumes airborne forces will land in their designated drop zones, assemble quickly, advance in coordinated attacks supported by artillery and armor. It assumes the Germans will be disorganized by the invasion, their communications disrupted, their will to resist broken. It assumes many things that war will prove wrong. The planners have calculated that taking Carentan will cost perhaps 200 to 300 casualties. They have studied the maps and weighed the factors and produced their estimates with scientific precision. They are off by a factor of 3. The strategic mathematics are brutally simple. With Carentan in Allied hands, the invasion front shrinks from 50 miles to 15 miles. Defending 15 continuous miles requires far fewer troops than defending 2 separate 25-mile beachheads with an 8-mile gap between them. That gap represents vulnerability, the place where German panzers could drive to the sea and split the invasion force. Supply lines become shorter, reinforcements can be shifted between sectors in hours instead of days, artillery can provide overlapping fields of fire, the beachhead becomes defensible. Without Carentan, every advantage reverses. The gap becomes a wound that can be exploited, probed, ripped open. Von der Heydt commands the 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment, German paratroopers, 919 men who will face the initial American assault. His men are not the garrison troops holding most of the Atlantic Wall, not the static divisions of overage veterans and pressed conscripts. These are volunteers, average age 24, most with 14 months of combat experience in Crete, North Africa, Italy. They wear the distinctive helmets of German airborne forces and carry the confidence of soldiers who have never been defeated. Von der Heydt himself is 37, a Bavarian count with a doctorate in international law who studied at American universities before the war. He speaks fluent English. He has read the same military theory texts as his American counterparts. This will be a battle between 2 airborne elites, each believing themselves superior, each about to be tested in ways they cannot imagine. The German defensive doctrine for Carentan reflects von der Heydt's understanding of limited resources. He knows he cannot defend everything with 900 men. His strategy is to make every yard costly, to funnel attackers into killing zones, to trade space for time while inflicting maximum casualties. He positions his strongest units in the southern approaches, where intelligence suggests the Americans will attack. He places his weakest forces, including 206 Osttruppen from the Eastern Front and 42 naval personnel scraped from coastal positions, in sectors he considers less threatened. 37 prepared strongpoints dot the town, each stocked with ammunition and supplies to hold for days if cut off. 14 anti-tank gun positions cover the causeways. He has done everything possible with what he has. The stage is set. 2 forces are about to collide at a crossroads, neither wanted but both need. The Americans must take Carentan to survive, the Germans must hold it to have any chance of defeating the invasion. Between them lies marshland and stone buildings, 7 causeways and 4 bridges, geography that will funnel thousands of men into battles measured in yards and hours. The planners have made their calculations. The soldiers have their orders. In 5 days, the paratroopers will jump into darkness, and everything will begin to go wrong in ways no one anticipated. Carentan will become the word. Soldiers whisper with exhaustion and respect. The town that almost broke the invasion, the battle that proved geography and courage matter more than plans. The key will turn, but the lock will require blood to open. 1:15 in the morning, June 6, 1944. Private John Delury of the 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment stands in the open door of a C-47 transport plane, wind screaming past at 130 miles per hour. Green light. He jumps into darkness over Normandy, weighted with 120 pounds of equipment strapped to a body that weighs 160 pounds. For 3 seconds, everything is weightless. Silence. Then the parachute deploys with a crack that sounds like a gunshot, and he's floating down through tracer fire and clouds toward what should be solid ground. Instead, he hits water, 4 feet of it. The weight of his equipment drives him down, and for 30 seconds that feel like 30 minutes. He's drowning in a French marsh while wearing an American uniform, cutting away his reserve chute with fingers that have gone clumsy, with panic. This is not the plan. The plan called for drop zones, carefully selected for firm ground, assembly areas marked by pathfinders, coordinated movement toward objectives. The plan assumed pilots would fly their assigned routes at the correct altitude and airspeed, delivering their human cargo to precise locations. But plans exist only until the shooting starts, and now the shooting has very much started. German anti-aircraft fire stitches the sky with orange and red. Pilots instinctively take evasive action, banking hard, increasing speed, dropping altitude. Some descend to 200 feet instead of the planned 600. Some accelerate to 150 miles per hour instead of 120. Small differences in numbers, catastrophic differences in results. By 2 a.m, the full scope of the disaster becomes apparent to those few officers who've managed to find their radios and achieve any communication. Colonel Robert Sink, commander of the 506th Regiment, lands 2 miles from his designated drop zone. In the first hour, he finds only 4 of his 2,000 men. Lieutenant Dick Winters, of Easy Company, lands in a flooded field, cuts himself free from his parachute, and begins searching for anyone from his unit. He finds 13 men. They're from different companies, different battalions. None of them have heavy weapons. Most have lost their equipment bundles in the jump. They're 6 miles from Carentan with no idea where their actual units are or if those units still exist as functional organizations. The mathematics of scattering tell a brutal story. The 101st Airborne Division dropped 6,600 paratroopers into Normandy in the pre-dawn hours. Only 18% reached their assembly areas within 4 hours. By dawn, aerial reconnaissance photographs show parachutes dotting a 40 square mile area instead of the planned 6 square mile concentration. Approximately 1,500 men are killed, wounded, or missing before they ever engage the enemy in deliberate combat. They drown in flooded fields, break bones, landing in trees or on stone walls, are captured alone or in small groups by German patrols. 60% of heavy weapons, mortars, machine guns, radios are lost, dropped into water, or scattered across the countryside where no one can find them. The German response adds another layer of chaos. The 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment mobilizes within 45 minutes of the first parachute sightings, but they face the same problem as the Americans. They can't find a main enemy force because there isn't one. German patrols encounter American soldiers in groups of 2, 5, 12, scattered across the landscape in no apparent pattern. Is this brilliant deception or incompetence? Von der Heydede initially suspects the former. Perhaps the Americans are deliberately dispersing to confuse defenses to make tracking and response impossible. Only later will he realize the truth. This is simply catastrophic failure of execution, transformed by necessity into improvised small unit warfare. Communication failure compounds every other problem. Division Commander Major General Maxwell Taylor remains out of radio contact with his regiments for 18 hours. Battalion commanders can't reach companies. Company commanders can't locate platoons. The carefully planned coordination of 6,000 men dissolving into hundreds of independent groups, each making decisions based on incomplete information and immediate necessity. Some groups move toward objectives, others focus on survival, some attack German positions, others hide and evade. The invasion plan called for organized advances along designated routes. What actually happens resembles 1,000 small raids occurring simultaneously across 40 square miles of Norman countryside. Yet from this chaos comes unexpected resilience. American paratroopers are trained to operate independently, to take initiative, to accomplish missions without orders. Small groups coalesce around any officer or NCO who demonstrates leadership. A lieutenant with 13 men decides to attack a German artillery position, blocking one approach to Carentan. A captain with 20 men from 3 different companies organizes an assault on a crossroads. The scattered drop that should have destroyed unit cohesion instead creates dozens of independent combat teams, each led by someone who understands the mission. Move toward Carentan, kill Germans, link up with other Americans. The chaos produces terrible inefficiency but also operational tempo that confuses German defenders, expecting organized conventional attacks. By 8 a.m. on June 6th, the first assembled American force of any size moves toward Carentan. It consists of 80 men from 5 different companies, led by 3 lieutenants who outrank each other in no clear hierarchy. They've pulled their weapons, 7 machine guns, 2 mortars with 60 shells between them, 1 radio that might work if they can find the right frequency. They're exhausted from jumping, drowning, fighting their way out of marshland. They haven't eaten since the previous evening in England. Their boots squelch with water. Some have already been in firefights. Some have already seen friends die. And they're still 6 miles from a town they're supposed to help capture in 3 days. The equipment losses prove particularly devastating for future operations. Paratroopers jumped, carrying personal weapons and basic combat loads, but the heavy weapons came in separate equipment bundles dropped from the same planes. These bundles, attached to cargo parachutes, were supposed to land near the soldiers who needed them. Instead, they landed in water, in trees, in German-held territory. By June 7th, American forces approaching Carentan possess approximately 40% of their intended heavy weapons. Machine guns are in short supply, mortars are scarce, anti-tank weapons are desperately needed but largely lost. The infantry will approach defended positions with rifles and courage, but without the supporting arms that make infantry attacks survivable. The disaster of the jump transforms the entire Carentan operation from a planned 3-day assault into something far more desperate and prolonged. Units that should have assembled on D-Day to attack on D+1 instead spend June 6th and 7th simply finding each other. Attacks that should have been battalion-strength coordinated operations become company-sized improvised affairs. The Germans gain precious time to strengthen defences, to bring up reinforcements, to prepare for battles the Americans don't yet know they'll fight. What was planned as swift capture becomes week-long siege. The paratroopers floating through darkness on June 6th don't know it yet, but many of them will spend the next week fighting toward a town they should have been positioned to attack within 24 hours. The crossroads that nobody wanted has become even more difficult to claim, and the price will be measured in casualties that planners never anticipated in their careful pre-invasion estimates. May 1944, 1 week before D-Day. Colonel Friedrich von der Heydte conducts his final inspection of Carentan's defences, walking streets he knows will soon run with blood. He is 37 years old, a count from Bavaria, a man who holds a doctorate in international law and once studied at universities in America and England. He speaks English fluently, he has read Caesar and Clausewitz in their original languages, and he knows, with the certainty that comes from experience and education, that his regiment is about to face the fight of its life. His memoir, written years later, describes this moment, ordering the evacuation of civilians, converting every stone building into a strong point, positioning machine guns to create interlocking fields of fire. He is transforming a French market town into a fortress, and he has exactly 9 days to finish the work. The men of the 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment are not the Wehrmacht of Allied propaganda films. They are not the exhausted garrison troops holding the Atlantic Wall, not the overage veterans or pressed conscripts from occupied territories. These are Fallschirmjäger, German paratroopers, and that title carries weight earned in blood across 3 years of war. 73% are volunteers, the average age is 24, the average soldier has 14 months of combat experience. They have jumped over Crete, fought in North Africa's desert, battled through Italian mountains. They wear distinctive helmets that set them apart from regular infantry. They carry a confidence that comes from never having been defeated as a unit, a pride that borders on arrogance but is rooted in competence. June 5th, 1944, the final briefing before invasion. Von der Heydte addresses his officers in a farmhouse outside Carentan. The room smells of cigarette smoke and damp wool. Maps cover every wall. He points to the causeways, the bridges, the strong points he's prepared. His orders are clear. Make every yard cost American blood. Do not waste lives in futile counterattacks. Defend from prepared positions. Trade space for time. Inflict casualties. Wait for reinforcements that are promised from the 17th SS Panzergrenadier Division. Hold Carentan for 1 week. If you can do this, he tells them, the invasion can still fail. If Carentan remains in German hands by June 13th, the Americans will have 2 separate beachheads instead of 1 continuous front. Divided forces can be defeated. 1 week. Hold for 1 week. The regiment's composition reveals both German strengths and the desperate expedients of a nation losing a world war. Von der Heydte's core fighting force consists of 919 elite paratroopers. To these, he has added 206 Osttruppen, Eastern Front auxiliaries of questionable reliability, and 42 naval personnel scraped from coastal positions who have minimal infantry training. He spreads these weaker units across sectors he judges less threatened, concentrating his veterans where he expects the main American assault. It is battlefield triage at organizational scale, maximizing limited resources against overwhelming enemy numbers. The weapons give German defenders a critical edge that will cost American lives. The MG-42 machine gun, centerpiece of German infantry tactics, fires 1,200 rounds per minute compared to the American BAR's 500 rounds per minute. This difference seems technical until soldiers experience it. The MG-42's rate of fire creates a sound like ripping cloth, a continuous stream of bullets that makes crossing open ground suicidal. Von der Heide has positioned 37 MG-42 teams in prepared strongpoints throughout Carentan, each with interlocking fields of fire. 14 anti-tank gun positions cover the approaches. Every sturdy building has been converted into a miniature fortress, with reinforced firing positions, stockpiled ammunition, and pre-planned withdrawal routes through connected cellars. 3 a.m, June 6th. Von der Heide receives initial reports of American airborne landings. He has prepared for this moment, but the reports confuse him. Parachutes are falling across 40 square miles with no apparent concentration. Where is the main attack? Where should he commit his reserves? He makes a decision that will prove crucial. Rather than launching immediate counterattacks against scattered groups, he orders his men to defensive positions in and around Carentan. Let the Americans come to us. Let them attack across the causeways where we hold every advantage. His restraint, born of experience and tactical acumen, preserves his force for the battles that matter. June 7th demonstrates why German paratroopers earned their reputation. A two-man MG-42 team positioned in a stone farmhouse 3 miles from Carentan holds off an American platoon for 6 hours. The position overlooks a causeway. Every time American soldiers try to advance, the machine gun opens fire. The Americans call for artillery, but communication problems delay the response. They try flanking movements, but the flooded marshland makes maneuvering impossible. Eventually, they bring up a tank, but the first tank is knocked out by a Panzerfaust at 50 yards. A second tank finally destroys the farmhouse with direct fire. When American soldiers enter the ruins, they find 1 German dead, 1 wounded, and over 3,000 spent machine gun casings. 2 men held off 40 for 6 hours. This pattern repeats across the approaches to Carentan. Von der Heide's background shapes his command style in ways that create grudging respect even from his enemies. He is Bavarian nobility, a man who believes in duty and honor in ways that seem archaic even in 1944. He has been awarded the Knight's Cross for valor in Crete. He opposes the Nazi regime on moral grounds, but serves Germany out of traditional military loyalty. His education makes him unusual in the Wehrmacht. He understands international law, speaks multiple languages, has studied American military doctrine. After the war, American officers who fought against him will describe him as the most formidable enemy commander they faced in Normandy. His men will describe him as demanding but fair, a commander who shares their dangers and respects their sacrifice. June 8th brings von der Heide's first request for reinforcements. His radio message to 7th Army headquarters promises he can hold Carentan for 7 days if the 17th SS Panzergrenadier Division attacks the American flank. The response is encouraging. The 17th SS is moving into position. What von der Heide doesn't know, what no one tells him, is that moving into position means the division is still 35 miles away and won't arrive for 5 days. This intelligence gap will shape his defensive decisions. He commits to holding Carentan longer than prudent because he believes relief is imminent. His soldiers will fight harder because they think help is coming. The promise of reinforcement becomes both motivation and tragic miscalculation. The Fallschirmjäger's defense of Carentan represents professional military competence divorced from political ideology. These soldiers are not fighting for Nazism or Hitler's vision. Most are too young to remember anything but Nazi rule, yet too educated to believe the propaganda completely. They fight for each other, for their regiment, for professional pride, for the ancient human reasons soldiers have always fought. When American paratroopers finally enter Carentan and face these defenders in house-to-house combat, they will discover something unexpected. Mutual respect between enemies. Both sides are elite airborne forces. Both sides have jumped into combat. Both sides understand what it costs. The battle for Carentan will be vicious, but it will not be between heroes and villains. It will be between two groups of young men who believe they're fighting for something worth dying for, and that shared conviction makes the killing somehow both more terrible and more comprehensible. 6 a.m, June 8th, 1944, the 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment begins its advance down what maps label Causeway No. 1, a raised road barely 12 feet wide stretching 800 yards across flooded marshland toward Carentan. Lieutenant Robert Brewer, leading the Point Company, will describe this moment in his after-action report with characteristic military understatement. Single-file advance with men unable to take cover in flooded marsh on either side. What he doesn't write, what can't be captured in official language, is the feeling of walking into a killing corridor where every step might be your last, and there's nowhere to hide, and the only choices are forward or back, and neither is good. The causeways leading to Carentan are military architecture from medieval times, elevated roads built centuries ago to connect towns across marshland that floods with seasonal rains and tides. They are 12 to 18 feet wide, raised 3 to 6 feet above water that now, thanks to German engineering, stands 3 to 6 feet deep. They stretch 600 to 1,200 yards depending on which approach you take. They have no cover, no concealment, no room to maneuver. One road, straight as an arrow, with flooded marsh on both sides that will drown you if you try to wade through it wearing 60 pounds of equipment. 4 defenders with machine guns positioned 500 yards back with clear fields of fire. They are perfect. For attackers, they are death traps disguised as roads. 14:30 hours, June 9th. Company E of the 506th Regiment has been pinned at bridge number 4 for 7 hours. One German MG-42 position 400 yards away fires in controlled bursts every time anyone moves. The Americans have tried everything. They've called for artillery, but the shells land in marsh water and their effectiveness is reduced by mud that absorbs the explosions. They've tried advancing under smoke, but wind clears the smoke faster than men can run. They've tried waiting for darkness, but orders come down. Take the bridge now. Combat footage from this day, grainy black and white images, shows soldiers pressed flat against the causeway surface, unable to advance or retreat, trapped in the killing zone while machine gun traces snap overhead. Engineers attempt a solution on June 10th at dawn. If the causeways are death traps, build new routes through the marsh, bypass the prepared defences. The theory is sound, the execution is nightmare. 3 engineers volunteer to probe the marsh, determine if equipment-laden infantry can wade through shallow water. 2 wade 50 yards before the bottom drops away beneath them. They're wearing field packs, ammunition, weapons. One manages to strip his gear and swim back. The other drowns, pulled under by the weight of equipment. His body recovered 3 days later when the marsh finally gives him up. The bypass plan is abandoned. The causeways remain the only way forward. Private John Taylor, a medic with the 502nd, will describe June 10th in interviews decades later. He spent the afternoon treating 14 wounded men on a 50-yard stretch of causeway while under fire. Every casualty had to be carried back single file by stretcher bearers who made themselves targets with every step. Taylor moved from man to man, crawling on his stomach, trying to stop bleeding, trying to ease pain, trying to convince wounded soldiers that they would survive this. Some did, some didn't. What he remembers most is not the blood or the screams, but the patience of the wounded. Men shot in the legs who apologized for being trouble. Men with gut wounds who asked about others before themselves. The intimate horror of battlefield medicine practiced in the open with no cover and enemy fire that never quite stops. 2 a.m, June 11th, Lieutenant Dick Winters leads Easy Company in a night assault on bridge number 2. The plan is desperate. Move through chest-deep water in darkness to flank the German position. Wade through the marsh that has drowned other men, that everyone has been told is impassable. Risk drowning to avoid being shot. Winters moves first, testing each step, feeling for drop-offs in water so murky you can't see your own hands beneath the surface. 40 men follow in single file, each holding the pack of the man ahead, moving in silence, broken only by water sounds and suppressed coughs. They wade for 2 hours through water that rises from their waists to their chests to their necks. Some men panic and have to be calmed by whispered commands. They emerge behind the German position like swamp monsters, soaking wet, hypothermic, and so grateful to be alive, they almost forget to be afraid of what comes next. The casualty statistics from the causeway battles reveal the grinding arithmetic of attritional warfare. 3rd Battalion of the 500, 2nd Parachute Infantry Regiment loses 115 men killed or wounded, taking 1,200 yards of causeway number 2 over 36 hours. That's 1 casualty for every 10 yards gained. Company strength drops from 140 men to 75. Rifle platoons shrink to 20 effectives. Machine gun teams lose gunners and have to train riflemen as replacements in hours instead of weeks. The mathematics are unsustainable, but there's no alternative. Carentan must be taken. The causeways are the only approach. So men keep advancing and dying in ratios that would make any accountant call the operation bankrupt. German defensive tactics maximize the causeway's killing potential. MG40. Two teams position themselves 300 to 500 yards back from the bridges and causeways, far enough to be difficult targets, close enough for accurate fire. Mortars have pre-registered coordinates on every bridge, every junction, every place where Americans must concentrate. When scouts report American movement, mortar shells land within 30 seconds. German doctrine calls for defense in depth. Let the Americans onto the causeway. Let them commit forces, then hit them when they're exposed and packed tight. It's effective enough that by June 11th, American units learn through experience what training never taught. Advance only at dawn or dusk when visibility is poor. Use smoke grenades constantly. Send scouts through water at night to probe for weaknesses. Never bunch up, never rush. Accept that this will take time and cost lives. Weather adds another variable to an already complicated equation. June 8th through 11th features intermittent rain, temperatures in the 50s, wind from the northwest. Visibility drops to 200 yards during heavy rain, which provides cover for American movement but also prevents effective use of supporting artillery and airstrikes. Soldiers are wet constantly. Trench foot becomes a medical concern within 72 hours. Weapons need constant cleaning to prevent rust and malfunction. The rain is both curse and blessing, making miserable soldiers slightly less likely to die, but no less miserable. Some will later say the rain saved lives by forcing slower, more cautious advances. Others will say it cost lives by prolonging the agony. By June 11th, the approaches to Carentan have become a landscape of collective trauma. Every causeway has its stories, its ghosts, its moments of terror or courage or simple endurance. Every bridge has been fought for. Every yard has been measured in time and blood. The soldiers who finally reach Carentan's outskirts are not the same men who started these approaches. They have learned that geography can kill as efficiently as bullets. That being brave doesn't make you bulletproof. That sometimes the only thing that keeps you moving forward is the knowledge that the men beside you are moving too, and you will not be the one who breaks, who falters, who lets them down. The causeways break some men and forge others, and sometimes the same man experiences both transformations in the space of hours. They are death corridors, baptism by fire, the price of entry to a battle that has barely begun. 1800 hours, June 8th, 1944. Colonel Robert Sink receives his orders over a crackling radio connection that fades in and out with atmospheric interference. Take Carentan with all speed. The voice from division headquarters is tinny but insistent. All speed. As if speed was something that could be commanded into existence. As if his regiment weren't already exhausted, scattered, under strength from 3 days of combat since the jump. Sink's replies recorded in the division log, 6 words that capture both determination and foreboding. We'll take it, but I can't tell you what it's going to cost. He doesn't know the price yet, none of them do, but he knows it will be high. 9 in the morning, June 9th. Lieutenant Dick Winters and Easy Company assault German positions at Brecourt Manor. 4 guns that are supposed to be coastal artillery pieces, but turn out to be 105mm howitzers positioned to fire on Utah Beach. The assault becomes famous in military history, taught at West Point as a textbook example of small unit tactics. But in the moment, it's simply 12 men attacking 4 gun positions defended by 50 Germans. Winters moves from gun to gun, using fire and maneuver, suppression and assault, tactics as old as warfare itself, but executed with desperate precision. They destroy all 4 guns, they lose 4 men, and they realize, when the smoke clears, that this wasn't about Utah Beach at all. These guns were positioned to block the approach to Saint-Côme-du-Mont, the town that guards the southern approach to Carentan. Von der Heide has been preparing depth defense, buying time, making every step forward cost American blood. Afternoon, June 10th. The 506th Regiment liberates Saint-Côme-du-Mont and finds a town destroyed by naval bombardment. 90% of buildings are damaged or destroyed. Pre-war population 800, current population 0. The Germans have evacuated weeks ago, pulling back to create what military planners call defense in depth, trade space for killing zones. The Americans enter expecting resistance and find rubble. They advance through streets where walls lean at impossible angles and cellars yawn open like wounds and everything smells of dust and explosives. It's a victory that feels hollow because everyone understands what it means. The Germans aren't broken. They're choosing their ground, shortening their lines, concentrating force. They've given up this town to make Carentan itself into a fortress. Sink establishes his command post 800 yards from Carentan on June 11th morning, close enough to hear the fighting, close enough to smell smoke from burning buildings. He spreads maps on a table and studies intelligence reports and knows he's racing time. His regiment is at 70% strength, 1,400 combat-effective men out of an original 2,000. They've been fighting for 5 days with minimal sleep, no hot food, constant stress. But intelligence indicates the 17th SS Panzergrenadier Division is approaching. 24 to 36 hours, maybe less. After that, the window closes. After that, taking Carentan becomes exponentially harder, maybe impossible. He has to attack now, tonight, with whatever he has, before German reinforcements arrive and turn this from difficult to suicidal. 1600 hours, June 11th, Sink makes the decision that will define his command and possibly his career. He commits all 3 battalions to simultaneous assault on Carentan. Every man goes in, 1st Battalion from the southwest, 2nd Battalion from the south, 3rd Battalion from the southeast, coordinated attack, multiple axes, overwhelm the defenders. It violates doctrine that says maintain reserves, keep a force in hand for exploitation or emergency. But Sink has been a soldier for 20 years and knows that sometimes doctrine loses to necessity. His radio message to battalion commanders is recorded, preserved in archives. Every man goes in. We end this tonight or we lose it tomorrow. The decision reflects both strategic pressure and personal calculation. General Maxwell Taylor, commanding the 101st Airborne Division, has personally visited Sink on June 10th. The conversation wasn't recorded, but participants remember the essence. Eisenhower is asking questions. Bradley is applying pressure. The beachhead remains divided. Casualties are mounting. Political and military leadership at the highest levels need Carentan taken now, not tomorrow, not next week, now. Taylor doesn't order Sink to attack immediately. Division commanders don't micromanage regimental commanders, but he makes the stakes clear. Delay has consequences. Failure has consequences. The invasion's success hangs on battles like this, on decisions made by colonels leading exhausted regiments against prepared defences. Communication issues complicate every decision. Division headquarters is 12 miles away. Radio contact is intermittent. Static crashes through every transmission. Messages are delayed or lost. Sink operates with significant autonomy, which means significant responsibility. He can't call for advice or clarification. He makes choices based on incomplete information and reports them afterward. This independence is both terrifying and liberating. He's alone with the weight of command, but he's also free to act on tactical judgment without waiting for approval from leaders too far away to understand the ground truth. It's the kind of command that creates legends or court-martials, and which outcome depends entirely on whether the attack succeeds. The regiment's condition reflects 5 days of sustained combat. Men have been living in foxholes, eating cold rations, drinking water purified with iodine tablets that leave everything tasting of chemicals. They've been shot at and shelled. They've watched friends die. They've killed enemy soldiers at ranges close enough to see faces. Some have been wounded and returned to duty. Some are fighting with injuries they haven't reported because they won't leave their units. The human body can endure astonishing stress for short periods, but 5 days isn't short. Exhaustion accumulates, decision-making deteriorates, reaction times slow. The 506th is still functional, still combat effective by official measures, but every soldier carries a fatigue that goes deeper than missed sleep. June 11th, evening. Sink walks among his men before the attack, moving from position to position, sharing words that won't be recorded but will be remembered. Some colonels command from maps in headquarters. Sink commands from the ground with his soldiers, making himself visible, sharing danger, offering presence that matters more than speeches. Men see him and draw conclusions. If the colonel is here, it can't be hopeless. If he's willing to risk this, maybe we can too. Leadership is complicated, built on foundations of psychology and example and shared experience. Sink understands this instinctively, the way some men understand music or mathematics. He has led soldiers since 1924, through peacetime training and now wartime necessity, and he has learned what works when words fail. The attack will begin at dawn, June 12th, 3 battalions, 1,400 men, multiple axes of advance, into a defended town held by estimated 900 Germans in prepared positions. The plan is aggressive, maybe reckless, definitely risky, but risk is relative. Every option carries danger. Attacking now risks immediate casualties. Waiting risks German reinforcement and higher future casualties. Withdrawing risks strategic failure. Sink has weighed the alternatives and chosen aggression, betting his regiment and his reputation that speed and violence of action can overcome German defensive advantages. In 12 hours, they'll discover if his gamble pays off or costs everything. The men clean weapons, check ammunition, write letters they hope won't be final, and wait for dawn with the particular nervousness that comes before battles where the outcome matters beyond individual survival. 5:30 in the morning, June 13th, 1944, the world explodes. German artillery barrage, over 400 shells in 20 minutes, crashes down on American positions southwest of Carentan. Explosions walk across foxholes and weapons positions like deliberate footsteps. Earth fountains into the air, trees shatter. The sound is physical, pressure waves that compress lungs and trigger reflexes older than thought. Soldiers press themselves into dirt that offers no real protection and understand with animal certainty that this is preparation fire, that something worse is coming. A German prisoner, captured later, will reveal that this barrage expended all available ammunition. Von der Heide is throwing everything into one desperate counterattack, betting the entire defense of Carentan on the next few hours. 6:15. Through smoke and dust, the 17th SS Panzer Grenadier Division attacks. These are not the depleted garrison troops holding Carentan. These are elite Waffen-SS, young fanatics who've survived the Eastern Front and consider themselves invincible. 850 men, supported by 4 Stooge 3 assault guns, advance on 2nd Battalion of the 506th Regiment, holding a 1,200-yard front with 250 exhausted paratroopers. The mathematics are brutal, more than 3 attackers for every defender, supported by armour, attacking soldiers who've been in continuous combat for 7 days. 2nd Battalion's positions are good. They hold Hill 30, elevated terrain with observation of approaches, but good positions don't stop artillery or armour or overwhelming numbers. 7 in the morning, Lieutenant Colonel Robert Strayer, commanding 2nd Battalion, reaches for his radio to call for artillery support. The radio operator turns to him with the news every commander dreads. Communication line is cut, probably by the barrage. No radio contact with division artillery, no way to call for the fires that might save them. The battalion is alone, 250 men against 850 with armour. Strayer makes calculations that are simultaneously simple and impossible. How long can we hold? How much ammunition do we have? Where are our weak points? The answers aren't encouraging. They can hold for maybe 2 hours at current casualty rates before positions become untenable. Ammunition is adequate but not abundant. Every position is weak when outnumbered 3-1. 8:30. This is the moment that battles turn on, the moment that gets discussed in military academies and written about in histories. Staff Sergeant Harrison Summers, already exhausted from previous combat, holds a critical crossroads position alone for 45 minutes against SS assault. He's armed with 1 M1 rifle, 8 magazines, and whatever can be taken from casualties. German soldiers advance in groups using fire and maneuver tactics from the same manuals. American forces study. Summers fires carefully, makes every shot count, shifts positions between bursts to prevent Germans from fixing his location. Bodies pile up in front of his position. Germans try flanking movements and he shoots them from different angles. They bring up a machine gun and he kills the crew before they can set up. For 45 minutes, he holds, giving 2nd Battalion time to establish a new defensive line, time that will prove the difference between withdrawal and annihilation. The fighting at what soldiers will call Bloody Gulch is intimate and vicious. Ranges close to 50 yards, 30 yards, sometimes 10 yards, where men shoot each other with rifles and pistols and whatever comes to hand. German assault guns provide terrifying support, their 75mm guns destroying American positions with high explosive shells. But assault guns without infantry support are vulnerable, and American soldiers with bazookas understand this. At ranges under 50 yards, bazooka teams stalk the stews through hedgerows and sunken roads, 2 assault guns are destroyed this way, crews killed before they can escape burning vehicles. The remaining 2 withdraw, their commanders deciding infantry support has broken down. Continuing the attack is suicide. 10 in the morning, the sound changes. American soldiers hear it before they see it, the distinctive rumble of tank engines from their rear. Terror spikes. Has German armor broken through? Are they surrounded? Before recognition hits. These are Sherman tanks, 17 M4 Shermans from Combat Command A of the 2nd Armored Division, arriving unexpectedly from Omaha Beach sector. The tanks deploy in line and advance, machine guns and 75mm cannons firing into German positions. The psychological effect is immediate and overwhelming. SS soldiers, brave in infantry combat, discover that facing armor without adequate anti-tank weapons transforms courage into futility. German attack momentum breaks. Within 30 minutes, SS forces are retreating, leaving behind dead and wounded and equipment they can't recover. The arrival of 2nd Armored Division represents improvised command at its finest, or desperate fortune depending on perspective. General Maurice Rose, commanding the Armored Combat Command, monitored radio traffic and heard 2nd Battalion's desperate situation. He diverted his force on his own initiative, without orders, without authorization, because the tactical situation demanded immediate response. This is either brilliant flexibility or dangerous violation of command structure. After the battle, Rose receives commendation rather than reprimand because success forgives initiative. Had 2nd Battalion been overrun, despite his intervention, the same decision might have ended his career. War rewards results, not intentions. Casualty figures from Bloody Gulch tell the story in numbers that abstract horror into mathematics. 2nd Battalion loses 125 killed or wounded, a 50% casualty rate that renders the unit combat ineffective by doctrinal standards. But German losses are worse. Approximately 450 killed, wounded or captured, 2 assault guns destroyed. The counterattack that was supposed to retake Carentan instead breaks the SS division's offensive capability. Von der Heydt's gamble has failed. His promised reinforcements have arrived but proven insufficient. The window for German victory has closed. Aftermath brings exhausted silence, broken by moans of wounded and occasional gunfire as nervous soldiers shoot at shadows. Medics move across the battlefield with red crosses painted on helmets that are supposed to provide protection but sometimes just make them targets. Stretcher bearers carry wounded back to aid stations. Graves registration teams begin the grim work of collecting bodies, identifying dead, recording names for notification of families who don't yet know they're receiving telegrams that begin, "We regret to inform you." This work continues through the afternoon and into evening. The administrative aftermath of violence, the bureaucracy of death that soldiers find both necessary and obscene. The Battle of Bloody Gulch represents the closest moment to American disaster in the Normandy campaign following D-Day. If Rose's tanks hadn't arrived, if Summers hadn't held the crossroads, if 2nd Battalion had broken under the SS assault, then Carentan, captured just 24 hours earlier after 6 days of fighting, would have been retaken by German forces. The beachhead would have remained divided. The invasion timeline would have been disrupted. History might have been different in ways impossible to calculate. But these what-ifs exist only in speculation. What actually happened is that American soldiers held, German soldiers retreated, and Carentan remained in Allied hands. The key had turned. The lock had opened. The price had been paid in full measure, and now the question became whether anyone remembered why the town had mattered so desperately in the first place. 2000 hours, June 11th, 1944. In a field command post 3 miles from Carentan, artillery officers huddle over maps spread across wooden crates. The maps are marked with 254 pre-registered targets within the town. Every intersection, every significant building, every defensive position identified by aerial reconnaissance and ground observation. 4 artillery battalions, 48 guns total, have moved into range. Forward observers have established positions in church steeples and attics with clear views of Carentan's streets. Radio operators test frequencies, ensure communication. The fire plan being finalized will coordinate these elements into an orchestra of destruction, a 36-hour bombardment designed to destroy German defenses and make the infantry assault possible. Wars are decided by men with rifles, but sometimes they're enabled by men with slide rules calculating trajectories and timing. 22-30 hours. 12 miles offshore, The heavy cruisers USS Quincy and USS Tuscaloosa turn to align their main batteries toward coordinates that represent a French town most sailors have never heard of. Each ship carries 9 8-inch guns, each gun firing shells that weigh 260 pounds and can punch through concrete. Naval gunfire support in 1944 is an experiment, a doctrine still being developed through trial and error. Pre-war theory said battleships couldn't hit ground targets accurately from naval distances, but wartime necessity has transformed theory. Spotter aircraft will observe shell impacts and radio corrections. The cruisers will fire, adjust, fire again, walking shells onto targets with mathematical precision that would astonish gunners from any previous war. 2 a.m, June 12th, the German counter-battery response begins, and its weakness reveals the fundamental imbalance of this battle. Von der Heide has 12 artillery pieces, a mix of calibers and types, and 400 rounds total ammunition. That's 33 rounds per gun for a battle that will last 3 days. American artillery has effectively unlimited ammunition. Resupply ships offshore carry thousands of shells, and more arrive daily. The German fire is accurate and professional, targeting suspected American gun positions with methodical precision. But 12 guns against 48, with ammunition constraints against unlimited supply, makes this a duel with predetermined outcome. German artillerymen know they're losing. Even as they fire, they continue because that's what soldiers do, because their positions might kill some Americans before being destroyed, because giving up is unthinkable even when winning is impossible. 8 a.m, June 12th, Lieutenant James Deal, forward observer, climbs into the steeple of a church in Saint-Côme-du-Mont with radio equipment, binoculars, and maps printed with coordinates of every building in Carentan. From 100 feet up, he has a god's eye view of the battlefield. Through binoculars, he can see German soldiers moving between buildings, machine gun teams establishing positions, civilians sheltering in cellars who have no idea they're about to experience industrial-scale violence. Deal selects his first target, Carentan's town hall, a stone building where intelligence suggests German command post has been established. He radios coordinates. 3 minutes later, 105mm shells arrive. First salvo falls short. He adjusts. Second salvo hits direct. After 14 hits, the building collapses into itself like a child's toy, crushed by an adult's foot. The coordination required for effective artillery fire represents technical achievement, often overlooked in combat narratives. Forward observers must identify targets, calculate coordinates, transmit requests through radio systems that work when they feel like it. Fire direction centers receive these requests, perform ballistic calculations accounting for wind, temperature, barrel wear, ammunition type, target elevation. Gun crews load and fire on command, maintaining rhythm that transforms weapons into machines. Shells travel miles through air, following parabolic trajectories invisible to observers, arriving with timing measured in seconds. When it works, artillery transforms warfare from individual combat to industrial process. When it fails, infantry attacks become suicide missions. 1800 hours, June 12th. The final preparation fire demonstrates coordination perfected through 2 years of wartime experience. Time on target bombardment. 144 shells from 48 guns launched at different times to arrive simultaneously at exactly 1800 hours and 0 seconds. This requires precise calculation, since guns at different distances fire at different times, so shells converge on target together. The psychological effect is devastating. Defending soldiers experience not gradual bombardment but instantaneous catastrophe, the world ending all at once, rather than incrementally. Buildings explode simultaneously across Carentan's southern sector. The sound is less like explosions than like the earth breaking, fundamental reality cracking. Soldiers in cellars feel structures above them disintegrate. Stone walls, 2 feet thick, crack and collapse. German defensive plans, so carefully prepared, dissolve into rubble and dust and terror. Naval gunfire adds another dimension to the bombardment. The Quincy achieves 89% accuracy, hitting 89 of 100 assigned targets from 12 miles away. This accuracy, impossible pre-war, comes from innovation born of necessity. Spotter aircraft, improved optics, better communication, and crews who've practiced these techniques across 2 years of war from North Africa to Pacific Islands. 8-inch shells striking stone buildings don't just damage them, they erase them. Where a building stood, a crater remains. Where a German strongpoint controlled an intersection, now there's broken masonry and sometimes body parts buried under tons of stone. The destruction is comprehensive and impersonal, delivered from ships whose crews never see the faces of men they're killing. Ammunition expenditure during the Carentan bombardment reveals the industrial capacity advantage that ultimately decides World War II. American artillery fires approximately 11,000 rounds at Carentan during June 11th and 12th. German artillery fires estimated 800 rounds total. This 14-to-1 disparity isn't about courage or competence but logistics and production. American factories produce unlimited ammunition. American ships deliver it safely across Atlantic. American trucks distribute it to guns. German factories are being bombed. German ships are being sunk. German trucks lack fuel. The artillery duel is already lost before the first shot, decided by industrial capacity, mobilized years earlier when nations chose total war and discovered that total war requires total economy. The civilian toll of bombardment is documented but rarely emphasized in military histories focused on tactical outcomes. Approximately 150 to 200 French civilians die in the June 11th, 12th bombardment, most sheltering in basements that collapse. These are not combatants but victims of geography, people who lived in a town that became strategically important through no choice of their own. Marie-Louise Osmont, schoolteacher, survives in a cellar that holds 36 hours while her neighbourhood disintegrates above. Her diary describes sounds beyond description, terror beyond expression, helplessness that transforms adults into children begging for mercy from forces that cannot hear prayers. When she emerges, her home is gone, everything is gone. Liberation, when it comes, will feel less like freedom than like surviving catastrophe. Artillery doctrine evolves in real time during Carentan bombardment. Forward observers discover that targeting individual buildings is less effective than targeting areas. The concentration of fire causes more psychological disruption than precision strikes. Gun crews learn that rapid fire causes barrel overheating that reduces accuracy, that pacing fire maintains effectiveness longer. Communication specialists develop backup systems when primary radios fail. These lessons, learned in blood and experimentation, are documented in after-action reports that become doctrine updates distributed throughout Normandy forces. War is often described as organized violence, but it's also organized learning institutions adapting to reality through processes that would be scientific if they weren't so lethal. By June 13th, when infantry enters Carentan, they advance behind artillery techniques refined through 72 hours of continuous operation. The bombardment hasn't destroyed every German defender, but it has destroyed German ability to mount coordinated defense. The key to Carentan turns out to be not rifles or courage, but mathematics and high explosives, delivered with industrial efficiency by men who never see the ground they're transforming into hell. 6 a.m, June 12, 1944. 1st Battalion of the 502nd Parachute Infantry Regiment crosses the final causeway into Carentan's outskirts, moving into a town that has been transformed by 36 hours of bombardment into something that barely resembles human habitation. Lieutenant Thomas Meehan III leads his company through streets where buildings lean at angles that defy physics, where rubble spills across cobblestones in drifts like snow, where dust hangs in the air, thick enough to taste. For 200 yards, they encounter nothing. Empty streets, silence broken only by their own footsteps, and the creak of damaged structures settling. Then the world erupts. Machine gun fire from every building simultaneously. A carefully prepared ambush that turns the street into a killing zone in seconds. The first minutes of urban combat teach lessons that no training exercise can replicate. Corporal Walter Gordon's squad takes cover behind a stone wall and realizes that stone walls which stop bullets also prevent seeing what's shooting at you. They're pinned, unable to advance or retreat, taking fire from multiple directions without clear targets. Gordon makes a decision born of desperation. His squad will clear the nearest house, establish a foothold, figure out the rest from there. 4 men approach a 2-story stone building while the rest provide covering fire. They kick in the door and enter darkness that smells of explosives and dust and fear. What happens next takes 45 minutes, but will be remembered in fragments, grenades thrown into rooms before entry, the distinctive crack of rifles in confined spaces, hand-to-hand fighting in a stairwell too narrow for two men side by side, the discovery of 3 German soldiers dead in a cellar and 1 wounded who surrenders. 8:30 in the morning. American soldiers are discovering that Carentan's defenders have prepared for urban warfare with thoroughness that borders on genius. German soldiers aren't just occupying buildings, they're using them as 3-dimensional battle space. Interconnected cellars allow movement between structures without exposing soldiers to street-level fire. Firing ports have been knocked through walls at various heights, creating overlapping fields of fire. Furniture and rubble have been arranged to create covered positions inside rooms. When Americans clear one building and move to the next, they sometimes take fire from the building they just cleared, German soldiers having returned through basement connections. This isn't warfare as taught in training, but improvised chess played with bullets and grenades where every move triggers counter-moves from an enemy who understands the board better. 1100 hours. The breakdown of tank infantry coordination demonstrates how combat plans dissolve under contact with reality. A Sherman tank from the 746th Tank Battalion advances down Rue Holgate in support of infantry assault. The infantry, engaged in building-to-building fighting, has moved ahead faster than coordinated movement doctrine allows. The tank, isolated from infantry protection, rounds a corner and faces a German soldier with a Panzerfaust at 15-yard range. The shaped charge warhead penetrates the Sherman side armor, the tank burns, 4-man crew dies in fire or trying to escape. The lesson is immediate and brutal. Tanks without infantry are targets, infantry without tanks lacks firepower, coordination is survival, and coordination in urban terrain is nearly impossible to maintain. 1400 hours. 1st Battalion has advanced 400 yards into Carentan at cost of 67 men killed or wounded. 400 yards in 8 hours. The mathematics of attrition suggest that reaching Carentan's centre will cost the battalion's entire strength twice over. But mathematics don't account for German withdrawal, don't factor in exhaustion affecting both sides, don't measure psychological effects of sustained combat. What the numbers miss is that warfare is fundamentally human, and humans break or adapt in ways that equations can't predict. Some men discover courage they didn't know they possessed. Others discover limits they never wanted to find. The battalion continues advancing, because stopping is death and retreating is unthinkable, so forward remains the only direction that makes sense, even when it makes no sense at all. Casualty evacuation becomes its own nightmare within the larger nightmare of urban assault. Wounded must be carried back through streets under fire, down causeways that are still being shelled intermittently, to aid stations 3 miles behind the front lines. Medics and stretcher bearers take 40% casualty rates because they move when others are taking cover, because they expose themselves to help wounded, because their job requires sacrificing safety for others. Private John Taylor, the medic, describes treating a soldier with abdominal wounds while lying in a doorway with machine gun fire snapping overhead. The soldier apologizes for being trouble. Taylor tells him to shut up and hold pressure on the wound while he prepares morphine. The soldier dies anyway, bleeding out faster than hands can stop, but he dies quieter because morphine takes the edge off agony. Taylor moves to the next casualty and the next, working until his medical supplies are exhausted and he's using his own clothing as bandages. 1800 hours, end of first day, 1st Battalion secures Carentan's southern quarter and establishes defensive positions for the night. 12 hours of fighting have produced 400 yards of advance and a casualty list that reads like a decimation. Companies that started the day with 100 men end with 60 or 70. Platoons are down to squad strength. Some squads are down to 3 or 4 soldiers. The officers hold conferences in shattered buildings and make calculations about combat effectiveness and determine that technically, officially, by doctrinal standards, the battalion should be pulled from the line for reconstitution. But there is no line, there are no reserves, and doctrine written in peacetime seems irrelevant in the reality of buildings that are simultaneously shelter and trap. By afternoon, American squads have independently developed innovations that will become standard urban warfare doctrine. Someone discovers that satchel charges, bags of explosives designed for demolition work, can blow holes through stone walls. This creates the mouse holing technique. Rather than moving through streets and doors where Germans expect you, blow through walls and move through buildings laterally. The innovation spreads through word of mouth and demonstration, squads teaching each other in the informal knowledge transfer that happens when survival depends on adaptation. By evening, American soldiers are mouse-holing routinely, moving through Carentan like termites through wood, creating paths that German defenders haven't prepared to defend. The German perspective on this first day of urban fighting reveals professional soldiers recognizing they're losing while refusing to quit. Von der Heytet's after-action reports describe American tactical flexibility exceeding expectations and inability to predict assault directions due to enemy willingness to accept casualties. What this means in practice is that American soldiers keep attacking in ways that seem reckless, absorbing losses that should break unit cohesion, advancing when doctrine says consolidate. The Germans are fighting by rules that Americans either don't know or don't follow, and this creates psychological pressure that compounds physical exhaustion. Defending is supposed to be easier than attacking, but defending against opponents who don't stop attacking transforms advantage into attrition race. And attrition races favor the side with more men. Night brings different terror than day. Darkness eliminates long-range visibility, reducing engagement ranges to 10 or 20 feet. Soldiers shoot at sounds, at shadows, at movement that might be enemy or might be friendly forces or might be nothing. Both sides use the darkness for infiltration, for repositioning, for evacuating wounded and bringing forward ammunition. The no man's land between American and German positions shrinks to distances measured in rooms rather than blocks. Some buildings are held by Americans on the ground floor and Germans on the second floor, with staircases as contested border zones. Sleep is impossible for most soldiers, inadvisable for all. Those who do sleep wake at every sound, adrenaline shocked into consciousness that takes minutes to differentiate present danger from nightmare memory. Dawn will bring another day of fighting, but first they must survive a night where every shadow might kill them and every sound might be the last thing they hear. 4 a.m, June 13th, 1944. American patrols moving through Carentan's southern sector discover something unexpected. German positions abandoned during the night. Foxholes empty, machine gun nests evacuated, buildings that cost American lives to approach now standing silent in pre-dawn darkness. The discovery triggers confusion and suspicion in equal measure. Is this withdrawal or trap? Have the Germans retreated or repositioned? Soldiers advance cautiously, expecting ambush, finding nothing. By dawn, the situation clarifies. Von der Heyde has executed a night withdrawal from Carentan's southern half, consolidating his shrinking force in the northern sector. He's trading space for time again, shortening his defensive line to match his reduced manpower. The Americans have won ground, but the battle is far from over. 9 a.m. Rue de Severville becomes the site of combat, so close quarters it defies military terminology to describe. Staff Sergeant Richard Wright's squad occupies a stone house. German squad occupies the stone house next door. A gap in the shared wall, blasted by earlier artillery, allows both sides to see into each other's positions. For 20 minutes, American and German soldiers shoot at each other through this 8-foot opening, rifles and submachine guns at range where missing is harder than hitting. The noise in confined space is overwhelming, temporarily deafening. Ricochets careen through rooms. Stone chips explode from walls like shrapnel. 2 Germans die. 3 Americans are wounded. The survivors on both sides pull back from the hole and establish new positions, neither side willing to be the next to look through that gap. 1300 hours. The Church of Notre Dame, Carentan's Catholic Church, transforms into dual-purpose facility that would seem impossible if it weren't necessary. American commanders establish command post in the vestry, radio operators working beneath religious paintings and crucifixes. In the sanctuary, medical teams operate on wounded soldiers, converting pews into beds, using the altar as surgical table. 73 wounded are treated here during a 10-hour period while fighting continues 100 yards away. Surgeons perform amputations and laparotomies and chest decompressions under conditions that would horrify civilian hospitals. Intermittent electricity, limited anesthesia, shells exploding close enough to shake instruments from tables. 41 men survive long enough for evacuation. 32 die, despite everything the medics can do. A priest, who has remained throughout the battle, moves between dying soldiers, offering last rites to Catholic and Protestant alike, his presence providing comfort that transcends doctrine. 1600 hours brings German counterattack from the town square, desperate attempt to recapture the church, and split American forces. 15 Fallschirmjäger attack with grenades and small arms, infantry assault unsupported by heavy weapons, because von der Heide has no heavy weapons remaining. The attack is brave and futile. American soldiers in church positions have clear fields of fire down approaches. Machine guns mounted in windows cut down Germans at 50-yard range. The attack fails within minutes, survivors retreating under cover of smoke grenades, leaving their dead in the street because retrieving bodies under fire is suicide. This failed counterattack marks a turning point. German forces are no longer capable of offensive action. They can defend, delay, exact cost, but they cannot retake ground once lost. Ammunition crisis affects both sides by afternoon of June 13th, though in different scales and with different implications. American soldiers are firing 200 to 300 rounds per rifle per day, far exceeding the standard combat load of 80 rounds. Supply lines are maintaining flow, but distribution to forward units in urban combat proves challenging. Some squads run critically low, forcing rationing and fire discipline that contradicts aggressive assault doctrine. German situation is worse. By mid-afternoon, von der Heide's soldiers are down to 30 to 50 rounds per rifle. Machine gun teams are firing in 2-shot bursts instead of sustained fire, conserving ammunition for critical moments. Some positions have no ammunition at all. Soldiers armed with rifles they cannot fire. Staying in position because abandoning post is unthinkable, but defending it with empty weapons is absurd. Building by building progress through June 13th creates map of territory captured measured in structures rather than streets. By nightfall, American forces control approximately 180 of Carentan's 400 significant structures. The town is being conquered one house at a time, urban warfare reduced to its most basic element. Clear the room, secure the room, move to the next room. Some buildings change hands multiple times as German soldiers infiltrate through cellars, reoccupy positions, are driven out again. The fighting creates intimacy between enemies who sometimes hear each other breathing through walls, who share buildings separated by floors or internal partitions, who know each other through combat rather than conversation. 1900 hours. Von der Heide orders final withdrawal from Carentan, transmitted through runners since radio equipment has been destroyed or abandoned. His message, captured through radio intercept from a unit that still has functioning equipment, is preserved in archives. Ammunition exhausted, position untenable, will attempt breakout to northeast. The withdrawal order is simultaneously pragmatic and agonizing. Pragmatic because staying means annihilation for no strategic gain. Agonizing because withdrawing means admitting defeat, abandoning positions his men died to defend, retreating before Americans he had promised to stop. Von der Heide is professional enough to recognize necessity and experienced enough to know that preserving his regiment for future battles matters more than symbolic last stands. The discovery of French civilians as American soldiers clear buildings adds complicating humanity to the military operation. Approximately 80 civilians are found sheltering in cellars throughout Carentan, mostly elderly and infirm who couldn't evacuate or chose not to. They've survived the bombardment, the house-to-house fighting, days without food or water or sanitation. Most are severely traumatized, some physically wounded, all psychologically marked by experiences that exceed civilian capacity to process. American soldiers, themselves traumatized, try to help, sharing rations, calling medics, guiding civilians to safer positions. The encounters are awkward and heartbreaking, communication limited by language barriers and shock, compassion limited by soldiers who have nothing to give, having already given everything to stay alive themselves. Night of June 13th marks the end of sustained combat in Carentan, but not the end of violence or fear. German soldiers attempting to withdraw move through darkness, navigating streets they know against Americans who are still nervous and trigger-happy. Firefights erupt sporadically as patrols encounter each other. Soldiers on both sides die in these confused, nighttime engagements that achieve nothing except adding names to casualty lists. By dawn, June 14th, Carentan will be firmly in American hands, but the night between belongs to neither side. to a liminal space where war continues from momentum even after purpose has been decided. The grinding battle has ground to its conclusion, but the grinding has left marks on every survivor that will never fully fade. 1000 hours, June 14th, 1944. A reconnaissance aircraft flies over Normandy at 8,000 feet. Photographers systematically capturing the battlefield with specialized cameras that will create images studied by analysts for decades. The photographs show something unprecedented. A continuous Allied front line stretching from Utah Beach in the west to Omaha Beach in the east. 15 miles of unified defensive perimeter where, 3 days earlier, existed 2 separate beachheads with an 8-mile gap between them. Carentan sits at the center of this newly unified line, the town that closed the gap, the crossroads that transformed invasion from vulnerable experiment into inevitable success. The photographer doesn't know this. He's just doing his job. But the images he captures will be used in strategic assessments that conclude the Normandy invasion was won not on June 6th but on June 13th, when Carentan fell and the beachhead became defensible. General Dwight Eisenhower receives the Carentan capture report at his headquarters in Portsmouth, England. The message is brief, stripped of emotional content. Carentan secured June 13th. Casualties acceptable. Beachhead unified. Proceeding to Phase 2 operations. Eisenhower circles the date on his situation map, draws a line connecting Utah and Omaha, and, for the first time since D-Day, allows himself to believe completely that the invasion will succeed. He has spent 8 days managing crisis, responding to setbacks, encouraging commanders, maintaining confidence he sometimes didn't feel. The capture of Carentan doesn't guarantee victory, but it eliminates the most likely scenario for catastrophic failure. With unified beachhead, the Allies can reinforce faster than Germans can counterattack. Logistics become manageable, defense becomes possible, the invasion has passed from precarious to probable. June 15th. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, commanding German forces in France, reviews the Carentan loss at 7th Army headquarters and reaches conclusions that align precisely with Eisenhower's assessment. His report to High Command is blunt. The opportunity to drive to the sea and split the invasion is lost. We can no longer defeat the landing. We can only delay the breakout. This assessment, coming from Germany's most respected field commander, represents inflection point in German strategic thinking. Before Carentan, there existed possibility of throwing Allies back into the sea. After Carentan, the only question is how long Germany can delay inevitable defeat in France. Rommel knows this. His subordinates know this. Some are beginning to suspect that delaying defeat in France only postpones the deeper question of how to end a war Germany cannot win. The logistics impact of Carentan's capture manifests within 48 hours in ways that seem prosaic but prove war-changing. June 16th, first supply trucks drive directly from Utah Beach to Omaha Beach through Carentan, carrying ammunition, medical supplies, rations, fuel. The route is 38 miles shorter than previous supply lines that had to circumnavigate the gap. Travel time decreases by 6 hours. Fuel consumption drops by 40% for each truck making the run. These efficiency improvements seem minor until multiplied by thousands of vehicles over months of operations. The unified beachhead creates supply corridor that supports explosive buildup of Allied forces. By June 20th, 12 days after Carentan's capture, 280,000 Allied soldiers have landed in Normandy. German reinforcement over the same period, 45,000 men. The mathematics of war have tipped irreversibly in Allied favour. Strategic timeline analysis reveals just how critical the 4-day delay in capturing Carentan actually was and wasn't. Original plan called for capture by June 9th, D+3. Actual capture occurred June 13th, D+7. 4 days behind schedule seems like failure, but strategic context complicates judgment. Those 4 days saw Germany unable to exploit the beachhead gap because their own forces were in disarray from invasion disruption. Those 4 days saw Allies securing both landing beaches, establishing air superiority, beginning logistics build-up. The delay in taking Carentan cost American casualties but didn't cost strategic advantage because Germany lacked capability to exploit Allied vulnerability. War is full of counterfactuals, but this one seems clear. The 4-day delay mattered less than the fact of eventual capture. Casualty accounting provides brutal mathematics that underpin strategic success. American losses in Carentan operations June 6th through 13th, 826 killed, wounded, or missing. German losses, estimated 2,000 plus killed, wounded, or captured. A 2-to-1 exchange ratio that seems favourable until you remember that Americans were attacking into prepared defences, which doctrine suggests should produce 3-to-1 casualties in favour of defenders. The favourable exchange ratio reflects overwhelming American advantages in artillery, air power, logistics, and replacement capacity. It also reflects German determination to defend despite impossible odds, extracting maximum cost for every yard surrendered. German strategic options foreclosed by Carentan's loss illuminate how single battles shape entire campaigns. With Carentan in German hands, Rommel could have concentrated armour for counterattacks into the interbeach gap, potentially splitting Allied forces and defeating them separately. Without Carentan, Rommel's only viable strategy becomes gradual withdrawal fighting, trading French territory for time to prepare defences closer to Germany. The shift from offensive to defensive strategy marks psychological as well as military turning point. German soldiers who believed in June 6th that they might defeat the invasion recognized by June 15th that they're fighting not to win but to delay losing. This recognition affects morale, affects desertion rates, affects willingness to sacrifice for objectives that no longer lead to victory. Beachhead mathematics demonstrate why Carentan mattered in ways that transcend tactical considerations. Unified 15-mile front allows concentration of 21 divisions in defensible perimeter with overlapping artillery coverage and mutual support between units. The alternative 225-mile beachheads, separated by 8 miles, would require spreading the same 21 divisions across 58 miles with a critical gap in the center. Defense becomes 4 times harder, not because of proportional calculation, but because of geometric vulnerability. The gap represents weakness that enables German operational maneuver, creating opportunity for armour to penetrate and envelop isolated forces. With Carentan captured, this vulnerability ceases to exist. The beachhead becomes fortress that grows stronger every day as more men and material flow across the beaches. Supply route impact extends beyond mere convenience into enabling entire categories of military operations. Shorter supply lines allow faster ammunition resupply, which enables more aggressive artillery use, which supports more frequent infantry attacks. Shorter supply lines reduce fuel consumption, allowing armour to operate further from beaches. Shorter supply lines decrease vehicle wear, reducing maintenance requirements and keeping more trucks operational. These interconnected effects create a virtuous cycle where logistical improvement enables operational tempo that prevents German forces from establishing stable defensive lines. The Normandy breakout that occurs in late July becomes possible because of logistics groundwork laid when Carentan unified the beachhead in mid-June. The strategic importance of Carentan reveals fundamental truth about warfare. Geography matters, logistics matter, and battles that seem secondary can prove decisive if they enable future operations. Historians will debate for decades whether the price paid for Carentan was acceptable, whether alternative approaches might have succeeded with fewer casualties, whether the 4-day delay mattered strategically. But these debates occur from comfort of retrospection, with knowledge of outcomes unavailable to commanders, making real-time decisions under incomplete information. What's indisputable is this: Carentan needed to be taken, was taken, and its capture transformed the invasion from precarious to probable. The 826 American casualties represent terrible price, but the alternative invasion failure, continued Nazi control of Western Europe, indefinite extension of the war would have cost millions more lives in incalculable suffering. The strategic calculation ultimately rests on this foundation. Some prices must be paid because the alternatives are worse, and soldiers make these payments so that others don't have to. June 6, 1944. Marie-Louise Osmont, 38-year-old schoolteacher, writes in her diary, with hands that shake from more than just the cold of her basement shelter. German soldiers have been pounding on doors since early morning, ordering evacuations. Her neighbourhood, on Carentan's outskirts, is being cleared. The Germans are efficient and firm, but not cruel. They give 30 minutes to pack essentials. They help elderly neighbours carry belongings. They explain, in broken French, that the Americans are coming and this area will become battlefield. Marie-Louise and 40 neighbours are herded into Carentan's centre, into cellars they're told will be safer. She doesn't understand why the city centre would be safer than the outskirts. Within days, she'll understand perfectly. The Germans are concentrating civilians in the core because they plan to defend the outskirts, and civilians in combat zones become casualties. The cellar of the Lemarrier family becomes home to 17 people during the battle, 11 family members and 6 neighbours who had nowhere else to go. Paul Lemarrier, the father, keeps journal on scraps of paper that will later be donated to the Carentan Municipal Archives. His entry for June 11th begins simply, "The ceiling is raining dust." The artillery bombardment that starts this day transforms their shelter from refuge into trap. Every explosion makes the building above them shudder. Dust sifts down constantly from ceiling beams that crack audibly under stress. They don't know if the next shell will collapse everything and bury them alive. They huddle in darkness. Electricity failed on day 2 and listen to the world ending above them. 36 hours of bombardment. 36 hours of wondering if each explosion is the last thing they'll hear. When silence finally comes, it's somehow worse than noise, because silence means wondering what comes next. Morning of June 13th. 9-year-old Jean Quetier and his mother emerge from their basement after American soldiers clear their street. Jean has spent 7 days underground, 7 days of terror and hunger, and his mother's whispered reassurances that everything will be fine, even though her eyes say she doesn't believe it. They climb stairs into daylight and discover their home has no roof. Walls stand, mostly, but the upper floor is gone, destroyed by a shell that hit directly. Jean's father's carpentry workshop, the building next door where Papa spent every day crafting furniture, is completely destroyed. Nothing remains but rubble and splintered wood and the smell of explosives. Jean starts crying, not from fear anymore but from loss, from understanding that the life they had before is gone as completely as that workshop. His mother holds him and says nothing because there's nothing to say that makes this better. June 14th. American civil affairs teams conduct first civilian census in liberated Carentan, moving street by street with translators and medical personnel. They find 380 civilians in the town, down from pre-war population of 4,120. Some fled before the battle, some died during it, some are missing, buried in collapsed buildings or fled into countryside, or simply unaccounted for in the chaos. The civil affairs officers document 143 confirmed civilian dead, 68 wounded, requiring immediate medical attention. These numbers are provisional, will increase as bodies are recovered from rubble over subsequent weeks. The statistics are recorded in neat handwriting in official reports, but the statisticians recording them have to stop periodically to compose themselves after interviewing families describing losses that resist bureaucratic documentation. Destruction statistics tell part of the story but can't convey the totality of loss. 72% of Carentan's buildings damaged or destroyed. 89% uninhabitable, lacking roofs or walls or structural integrity. Complete infrastructure failure. No electricity, no running water, no sewage system. The market square where farmers sold produce for 8 centuries is a crater. The church is damaged but standing, held together by architecture and faith. The schools are rubble. The hospital is rubble. The train station is rubble. Everything that made Carentan a functioning community has been systematically destroyed by military necessity that couldn't account for civilian needs, because military necessity never does. Father Louis Lebray, the parish priest who remained throughout the battle, conducts Mass on June 20th in the damaged church. Attendance is 12 people, 12 from a pre-war congregation of hundreds. They sit in pews salvaged from wreckage, under a roof that lets in rain, before an altar that survived somehow when everything else was destroyed. Father Lebray's sermon, preserved in diocesan archives, addresses the question everyone is asking: why did God allow this? His answer is less theology than pastoral care. God didn't allow this, humans did, and God weeps with us in our suffering. Some parishioners find comfort in these words. Others find nothing can comfort the discovery that faith doesn't make you bulletproof or your home bomb-proof or your children safe from wars they didn't start and don't understand. Post-battle displacement creates humanitarian crisis that military commanders acknowledge but cannot solve. By July 1st, 3 weeks after liberation, only 850 civilians have returned to Carentan. Most cannot return for 6 to 12 months because their homes don't exist anymore or exist as structures too dangerous to occupy. They scatter to relatives in other towns, to refugee centres established by Free French authorities, to makeshift camps where conditions are better than being dead, but not by much. The French government will eventually provide reconstruction assistance, but that's years away. In the immediate aftermath, people survive on Red Cross supplies, on American military rations shared by soldiers who have little extra to share, on charity from communities that are themselves struggling to recover from 4 years of occupation. Allied compensation proves inadequate to loss. American Civil Affairs distributes emergency supplies, food, blankets, medical care for wounded. These address immediate survival but not reconstruction. France won't receive Marshall Plan funds until 1948, 4 years away. In the interim, Carentan's residents rebuild with whatever they can salvage, living in damaged buildings, sleeping in cellars that once were shelters from artillery and now are shelters from rain and cold. Insurance doesn't cover war damage. Savings were depleted during occupation. Government assistance is promised but delayed by larger priorities of national reconstruction. The civilians who suffered through the battle discover that liberation doesn't end suffering, just transforms it into different forms that lack the adrenaline clarity of survival. Marie-Louise Osmont's diary continues through June and July, documenting daily reality of life after battle. June 16th, found 3 potatoes in the rubble of my kitchen, boiled them with water from the well. It was the best meal I've had in 2 weeks. June 23rd, American soldier gave me chocolate. I haven't tasted chocolate since 1940. I cried and he looked embarrassed. July 5th, counted 43 shell craters visible from my front door. This was my neighborhood. I don't recognize it anymore. The entry is a matter of fact, describing extraordinary circumstances with ordinary language, because that's how humans process trauma. By making it mundane enough to endure, the civilian experience of Carentan reveals uncomfortable truth about liberation warfare. The liberated often pay prices as high as the liberators. Americans lost 826 soldiers taking the town. French civilians lost 143 dead, hundreds wounded, thousands displaced, a community destroyed. The strategic necessity that demanded Carentan's capture didn't account for this cost, because strategic necessity never does. The civilians trapped between armies weren't given choice about whether this battle was worth fighting in their homes. They endured it because geography made their town militarily significant, and in total war, military significance outweighs civilian suffering. These truths are uncomfortable but inescapable. Freedom has costs that are often paid by those who didn't choose the fight, and liberation can feel like destruction when it's your home being liberated into rubble. The Americans who fought for Carentan knew they were fighting for something important. The French who lived through it learned that importance and suffering are not mutually exclusive but coexist in ways that resist simple narratives of heroism and sacrifice. June 12, 1944, 1400 hours. A Sherman tank from the 746th Tank Battalion advances down a Carentan street, crew buttoned up inside, machine guns sweeping for targets. The tank weighs 33 tons, mounts a 75mm main gun, represents American industrial might made mobile. Its 5-man crew has trained together for 9 months, survived the landing at Utah Beach, supported infantry operations for 6 days. They're experienced, professional, confident. None of this matters when a German soldier in a second-story window fires a Panzerfaust from 15 yards. The shaped charge warhead, propelled by gunpowder that costs the German military 30 Reichsmarks to produce, penetrates the Sherman side armor and fills the crew compartment with molten metal and overpressure. 4 men die inside the tank. 1 escapes on fire, rolling in the street to extinguish flames that will leave him scarred for life. The vulnerability of American armor in urban terrain proves one of Carentan's most painful lessons. Sherman tanks are designed for open field warfare, combining mobility, firepower, and adequate armor for tank versus tank engagement. But urban streets negate mobility advantages by confining movement to predictable routes. Buildings provide countless concealment positions for infantry, anti-tank weapons. The Panzerfaust, in particular, proves devastating. It can be fired from buildings, around corners, from basements, at ranges where the tank crew has no time to react. Frontal armor, 51mm thick, can defeat most German anti-tank guns. Side armor, 38mm, cannot stop shape charge weapons. Urban terrain forces tanks to expose their sides constantly while turning corners, passing through intersections, navigating streets designed for horses and carts, not 33-ton fighting vehicles. June 13th, afternoon, Captain James Burt watches another Sherman burn and realizes something must change immediately. He's a tanker, not an engineer, but desperation breeds innovation. He has a telephone, a field telephone from a damaged communication post. He has a crew that's willing to try anything. They mount the telephone to the rear exterior of a Sherman tank, running wires to the intercom system inside. Now, infantry can pick up the phone and talk directly to the tank commander without exposing themselves to enemy fire or trying to shout over engine noise and gunfire. The innovation is crude, inelegant, exactly the kind of field modification that military bureaucracy would reject in peacetime. But this isn't peacetime. By evening, 3 more tanks in the battalion have telephones mounted on their rear hulls. By June 20th, the modification is being copied throughout Normandy. June 14th brings systematic after-action analysis at 2nd Armoured Division headquarters. Officers reconstructing tank losses to understand patterns and develop countermeasures. The data are grim. 11 Sherman tanks destroyed or disabled during Carentan operations. 7 lost to Panzerfausts and mines. 2 lost to assault guns. 2 lost to mechanical failure. 0 lost to German tank fire because German tanks were never present in numbers. The ratio tells the story. American armor is being defeated not by enemy armor, but by infantry, anti-tank weapons and terrain that negates advantages of mobility and range. The officers generating these statistics don't use emotional language in their reports, but the subtext is clear. American tank crews are dying unnecessarily because doctrine hasn't adapted to reality of urban warfare. Panzerfaust effectiveness reveals asymmetric warfare equation that troubles American planners. Each Panzerfaust costs approximately 30 Reichsmarks, roughly $15 in equivalent purchasing power. Each Sherman tank costs $57,000. A weapon that costs $15 can destroy a weapon that costs $57,000 if employed by a soldier with courage to close within 60 meters. The exchange ratio is almost 4,000 to 1 in favor of the Germans. This equation explains why German forces continued defending Carentan despite overwhelming American material superiority. They could afford to trade soldiers with cheap weapons for expensive American tanks, even if the ultimate outcome remained inevitable. The mathematics of industrial war suddenly included variables that production statistics couldn't account for. Field modifications begin appearing with remarkable speed once crews understand official doctrine won't keep them alive. Sandbags mounted on frontal armor add protection against shaped charges, though at cost of additional weight that strains transmissions and reduces mobility. Spare tank track sections welded to hull sides provide minimal additional armor but significant psychological reassurance. Some crews begin carrying infantry with them, soldiers riding on rear decks who dismount before combat to provide close protection against anti-tank teams. These modifications are improvised, inconsistent, sometimes counterproductive, but they represent institutional learning happening in real time, driven by survival necessity rather than doctrinal development. July 1st brings revised tank doctrine memo circulated throughout First Army in Normandy. The document codifies lessons from Carentan and other urban battles, establishing new protocols. Tanks will not operate in urban terrain without infantry. Minimum combat element is tank infantry team. Infantry responsible for close protection while tanks provide fire support. Coordination is survival. The doctrine update seems obvious in retrospect, but obvious is only visible after experience teaches it. The soldiers who died in burning Shermans during Carentan paid tuition for lessons that will save lives in subsequent battles at Saint-Lô, Aachen, Cologne. Their deaths were not meaningless, but this fact provides cold comfort to the families receiving telegrams that begin, "We regret to inform you." Comparative analysis of tank losses before and after doctrine changes demonstrates measurable improvement. In hedgerow fighting following Carentan, tank losses decrease by approximately 40% once new tactics are implemented. The improvement comes not from better tanks, Shermans remain vulnerable, but from better employment. Tanks with infantry support survive. Tanks isolated from infantry burn. The equation is simple enough that even institutional military bureaucracy can recognize and codify it. But the 40% reduction means hundreds of tank crews survive battles they might have lost under previous doctrine, lives saved by lessons written in blood of Carentan's streets. The armor revolution triggered by Carentan extends beyond tactics to technology development. Reports from the battlefield reach Aberdeen Proving Ground, where engineers begin work on tank infantry communication systems more sophisticated than telephone on the hull. They begin designing tank modifications specifically for urban warfare, better side armor, improved observation for close quarters combat, weapons configurations optimized for building targets rather than open field engagements. Most of these improvements won't reach combat units until 1945, too late for Normandy but in time for the final drives into Germany. The soldiers who fought at Carentan won't benefit from these improvements, but their experience shapes development that benefits soldiers who follow them. The human cost of institutional learning remains the uncomfortable reality of military innovation. 11 tank crews died or were wounded during Carentan operations before commanders understood that existing doctrine was inadequate for urban warfare. How many crews died in earlier battles before Carentan? How many will die in subsequent battles before improvements reach frontline units? The numbers resist calculation because some lessons need relearning by each new unit in each new terrain against each new enemy. War is supposed to be organized violence, but learning processes remain chaotic, driven by failure and death, rather than theory and planning. The tanks that burn in Carentan streets are teaching machines, and the curriculum is written in fire. The students who survive take these lessons to future battles, and the cycle continues. Each generation of soldiers teaching the next, through experience that no training exercise can replicate. The revolution in armor warfare begins not in laboratories or at conferences, but in moments, like Captain Burt mounting a telephone to his tank's hull because he's tired of watching his men die, and sometimes that's how progress happens, one improvisation at a time, driven by desperation and witnessed by survivors who remember and transmit what was learned at such terrible cost. June 10th, 1944, 3 locations, 3 commanders facing the same problem with radically different perspectives. Colonel Robert Sink studies maps in his forward command post, 800 yards from Carentan, chain-smoking cigarettes, calculating how to take a defended town with insufficient forces before German reinforcements arrive. 30 miles northeast, General Maxwell Taylor, commanding 101st Airborne Division from relative safety, reviews casualty reports and wonders if his commanders are pushing too hard, too fast, if prudence might save lives that aggression is spending. In Carentan itself, Colonel Friedrich von der Heide positions his dwindling forces, requests reinforcements that won't arrive in time, and contemplates the mathematics of defensive warfare, where every equation leads to the same answer. Defeat is inevitable, only timing remains variable. 3 professional soldiers, 3 competent commanders, 3 approaches that will define how history judges the Battle of Carentan. Robert Sink is 37 years old, West Point class of 1927, pre-war infantry officer who has spent 17 years preparing for exactly this kind of command challenge. His leadership philosophy emphasizes aggression, momentum, maintaining initiative regardless of cost. He believes speed creates opportunities that methodical approaches miss. He trusts his subordinates to execute with minimal guidance. He leads from forward positions where he can see and be seen. His men respect him more than they love him, which is exactly how Sink prefers it. He's not interested in popularity. He's interested in winning battles, and winning requires accepting casualties that peacetime training never forced him to consider. The decision to commit all 3 battalions simultaneously to Carentan assault represents Sink's philosophy made operational. Attack with everything, except no reserve. Bet the regiment on single coordinated assault. Maxwell Taylor, commanding 101st Airborne, is 43 years old, youngest division commander in the American military. He graduated West Point 4th in his class, speaks 4 languages, has worked in military intelligence and strategic planning. His approach emphasizes combined arms, coordination, methodical preparation, preserving forces for sustained operations. Where Sink sees opportunities in aggression, Taylor sees risks. Where Sink is willing to spend lives for speed, Taylor prefers spending time to save lives. The tension between these philosophies creates friction that neither man discusses openly but both feel constantly. Taylor visits Sink on June 10th and makes his concerns clear. The attack is moving too fast, casualties are too high, perhaps waiting for more artillery support would achieve the same objectives at lower cost. Sink listens politely and continues planning his assault exactly as intended. Von der Heide represents third command philosophy, shaped by German military tradition and 3 years of combat experience across 3 continents. He is Bavarian nobility, doctor of international law, pre-war academic who joined military from sense of traditional duty rather than political conviction. His command style emphasizes defensive economy of force. Extract maximum enemy casualties while preserving your own forces for withdrawal and future battles. He understands that defending Carentan is ultimately futile, but believes competent defense serves strategic purpose by delaying Americans, allowing German reinforcements to establish positions further inland, buying time measured in days that matter strategically even if they don't change ultimate outcomes. His decision to withdraw from Carentan on June 13th represents this calculation. Additional defense achieves nothing except destroying his regiment, and destroyed regiments serve no strategic purpose. The casualty rates under each commander reveal differences in both philosophy and resources. Sink's 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment takes 42% casualties during June 6th through 13th. Taylor's 101st Airborne Division overall averages 28% casualties during the same period. The disparity reflects Sink's aggressive employment of his regiment versus Taylor's more cautious division-wide approach. Von der Hayt's 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment takes 63% casualties, highest of the three, but this reflects defensive realities more than command decisions. Defenders in prepared positions usually take fewer casualties than attackers, but when attackers have overwhelming artillery and air support, defensive advantages evaporate and casualties skyrocket. Von der Hardy's losses are unavoidable consequence of being German in June 1944, when American material superiority makes competent defense expensive and incompetent defense suicidal. June 11th crisis meeting illustrates different responses to identical strategic problem. Intelligence indicates 17th SS Panzer Grenadier Division approaching Carentan within 24 to 36 hours. Taylor's response: wait for the SS Division to arrive, attack the combined German forces with full American strength, accept delay in exchange for higher confidence of success. Sink's response: attack immediately before SS arrives, accept risk of insufficient force in exchange for fighting only one enemy at a time. Von der Hayt's response: hold Carentan until SS arrives, coordinate defense with SS attack on American flank, defeat invasion by exploiting temporarily divided forces. All three responses are tactically sound. All three reflect commanders' personality and priorities. Only one gets implemented because Sink has operational command, and Taylor doesn't overrule him, and von der Hayt doesn't receive the reinforcements his plan requires. Post-war careers reflect how military institutions evaluate command performance. Sink receives promotion, continues combat command through remainder of European war, retires as Major General. Taylor becomes Army Chief of Staff, serves as ambassador to Vietnam, becomes national security figure whose influence extends far beyond battlefield command. Von der Hayt survives the war, returns to academic career, writes influential books on airborne operations that are studied by military professionals worldwide, including Americans who fought against him. The institution rewards all three, suggesting that different command styles can achieve success given appropriate circumstances. Or perhaps it suggests that institutions evaluate commanders more on outcomes than methods, and all three achieve what was possible given their resources and situations. The debate about Sink's aggression versus Taylor's caution continues decades later in military history, journals, and staff college seminars. Was Sink's immediate attack on Carentan brilliant or reckless? Would waiting 3 additional days for full artillery support have reduced casualties enough to justify strategic delay? The questions resist definitive answers because they require counterfactual analysis of battles never fought. What's demonstrable is this: Sink took Carentan in 7 days at cost of 826 casualties. Alternative approaches might have taken longer with more or fewer casualties, might have arrived too late to prevent German reinforcement, might have succeeded with different casualties distributed differently among units. Hindsight provides clarity about what happened, but limited insight into what might have happened under different command decisions. Von der Hayt's 1954 memoir provides perspective from the other side, describing American commanders with professional respect mixed with tactical criticism. He praises Sink's aggressive tempo, noting it prevented German forces from establishing stable defensive positions. He criticizes American artillery employment as excessive, destroying town unnecessarily, when more precise fire might have achieved same military effect with less civilian cost. He acknowledges American material superiority made German victory impossible, but argues competent German defense extracted higher cost than Americans expected. His assessment carries weight because he's not making excuses. Germany lost, he acknowledges this, but analyzing professional performance divorced from political outcome. The commanders of Carentan represent three competent professionals responding to similar challenges with different philosophies shaped by training, personality, and national military culture. Sink's aggression reflects American confidence in material superiority and willingness to accept casualties in exchange for speed. Taylor's caution reflects staff officers' tendency towards systematic planning and risk mitigation. Von der Heyte's economy of force reflects German necessity of fighting outnumbered against enemies with unlimited resources. None of the three is incompetent. None makes a decision that seems obviously wrong given information available at the time, yet their decisions produce dramatically different outcomes for soldiers under their command. Because command is ultimately about choosing between imperfect alternatives where every choice costs lives and only results determine whether those costs were justified. The Battle of Carentan is fought by soldiers, but it's shaped by commanders whose decisions ripple through ranks in ways that create victory or defeat, survival or death, outcomes that are simultaneously products of human choice and forces beyond any individual's control. 1930 hours, June 13th, 1944. Colonel Friedrich von der Heyde issues the order he has dreaded since the battle began: withdraw from Carentan. His instructions, transmitted through runners because most radio equipment has been destroyed, are precise and professional. Fighting withdrawal by squads, maintain unit cohesion, rally point 5 kilometers northeast at Saintny. Leave wounded who cannot walk with medical personnel and white flags. Destroy equipment that cannot be carried. Move in darkness. Use terrain knowledge to avoid American positions. These are textbook withdrawal procedures, doctrine learned at German military academies and practiced in 3 years of war. But doctrine doesn't capture what withdrawal means emotionally: admitting defeat, abandoning positions purchased with blood, retreating before an enemy you promised to stop. 2200 hours. Lieutenant Karl Mayer and his 12-man squad become rearguard for the regiment's escape, assigned to hold Carentan's town square for 2 hours, while others evacuate. Mayer is 23 years old, veteran of Crete and Italy, holder of the Iron Cross Second Class. He positions his men in buildings overlooking the square, establishes interlocking fields of fire, distributes remaining ammunition equally among his soldiers. They have perhaps 40 rounds per rifle, 2 grenades per man, 1 MG42 with 300 rounds. Not enough for sustained defense, but sufficient for delaying action. Mayer doesn't tell his squad that this is likely suicide mission. They already know. Veterans understand when orders mean someone must die so others can live. 4 of them will survive the next 2 hours by escaping through sewers. 8 will die in the square they were ordered to defend. 1:30 in the morning, June 14th. Captain Heinrich von Roon leads 80 men through flooded marshland northeast of Carentan, moving in darkness through terrain that has killed others who attempted it. Von Roon grew up in this region, spent summers in Normandy before the war, knows the marshes from childhood exploration. This intimate terrain knowledge becomes survival advantage. He guides his men around deep channels, across solid ground, invisible to those unfamiliar with the landscape, through water that rises to their waists but never over their heads. American positions are all around them, foxholes and listening posts within 200 yards, but darkness and silence and knowledge of ground allow 80 men to slip through American lines like ghosts. They move in single file, each man holding the equipment of the man ahead, making no sound except water displaced by bodies and suppressed breathing. 3 in the morning, American patrols enter Carentan's town square and discover the town abandoned. Lieutenant Dick Winters, leading Easy Company, advances cautiously, expecting ambush. Instead, he finds silence. Buildings stand empty. German equipment lies scattered in streets. Rifles, helmets, boxes of ammunition too heavy to carry. In the town square, 8 German bodies, the rearguard that held too long. Winters orders his men to secure the area, establish defensive perimeter, prepare for possible counterattack. But the counterattack doesn't come because there's no force remaining to launch it. Von der Heyde has executed textbook withdrawal, extracting his surviving forces under American noses. Carentan is empty of enemy soldiers. The battle is over. The Americans have won, and their victory feels strangely hollow in the silence of an abandoned town. 900 hours, June 14th. Von der Heide conducts headcount at the rally point in Saint-Denis, calling unit names and waiting for responses that come less frequently than he hopes. 340 men answer, 340 from the 919 who entered battle on June 6th. The losses are staggering but not unexpected. Approximately 60% casualties in 8 days of sustained combat against enemy with overwhelming material superiority. But the 340 survivors are intact as fighting force, capable of reorganization and return to combat. Von der Heide has also collected 42 stragglers from other units who joined the retreat, soldiers separated from their formations who found his withdrawal and attached themselves to organized force. The final German accounting, approximately 580 German soldiers evacuated from Carentan or escaped independently. 340 more captured or killed during withdrawal fighting. 60 missing, a category that includes deserters, soldiers who died in the marsh, and those whose fates remain unknown. The equipment abandoned during retreat represents everything German soldiers couldn't carry. All artillery pieces, all heavy weapons above squad level, approximately 200 rifles, 8 vehicles including half-tracks and trucks. The Germans take only what men can carry on their backs. Personal weapons, basic ammunition loads, some medical supplies, no luxuries. Von der Heide's decision to abandon heavy equipment is both pragmatic and painful. Pragmatic because transporting artillery through marshland in darkness is impossible. Painful because each abandoned gun represents German industrial capacity that cannot be replaced, weapons that won't be available for future battles. The material loss troubles him less than the human loss, but both represent permanent degradation of German defensive capability in Normandy. American failure to interdict the retreat reveals limitations that will be analysed and debated for decades. Despite air superiority, despite numerical advantage, despite occupation of dominant terrain, American forces allow approximately 580 German soldiers to escape. The failure stems from multiple factors. Exhausted infantry units that have been in sustained combat for 7 days, lack energy for aggressive pursuit. Limited night fighting capability means darkness provides cover that daylight wouldn't. Cautiousness bred by a week of hard fighting makes commanders hesitant to rush into darkness where ambush might wait. The combination creates window of opportunity that von der Heide exploits with professional competence. Post-battle analysis will identify this as operational failure, but soldiers on the ground making real-time decisions with incomplete information chose survival over aggressive pursuit, and it's difficult to criticize exhausted men for being cautious. German morale impact of Carentan withdrawal proves complex and contradictory. Von der Heide's after-action report notes troops maintain discipline and cohesion despite defeat unit remains combat effective. This assessment seems almost absurd. How can a unit that took 60% casualties and withdrew from every objective be considered combat effective? But military effectiveness isn't measured solely by victory or casualty rates. It's measured by whether soldiers will continue fighting when ordered, whether units maintain organization, whether discipline persists despite defeat. By these standards, the 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment remains effective. The soldiers who escaped Carentan did so as organized units under command, not as individual deserters fleeing chaos. They maintained weapons and equipment. They followed orders during withdrawal. They are beaten but not broken, defeated but not destroyed. The psychological dimension of retreat affects soldiers in ways that resist quantification. German paratroopers who entered Carentan, confident of their ability to stop Americans, now understand they cannot stop anything when enemy possesses unlimited artillery and air support. This recognition doesn't destroy morale immediately, but it plants seeds of doubt that will grow through summer of 1944 as German forces retreat across France. Soldiers who believed in June that Germany might still win the war begin questioning this belief in July and August as retreat becomes routine. Von der Heide himself, professional soldier committed to duty, begins writing letters to his wife that express private doubts he never shares with his men. Defeat is corrosive. One battle doesn't break army, but accumulated defeats create erosion that eventually collapses will to resist. The retreat from Carentan marks psychological turning point in Normandy campaign. This is first major German withdrawal since invasion began. Previous battles saw Germans holding positions or conducting short tactical retreats followed by counterattacks. Carentan represents strategic withdrawal, abandonment of important objective, recognition that defensive positions cannot be held indefinitely against enemy with such overwhelming material advantages. German soldiers throughout Normandy hear about Carentan and understand implications. If elite paratroopers in prepared defences couldn't hold, what chance do regular infantry in improvised positions have? The question doesn't produce immediate collapse, but it changes calculations soldiers make about risks worth taking and objectives worth dying to defend. Von der Heydt's personal processing of defeat appears in memoir written decade later, Reflection Shaped by Time and Outcome of War. He describes withdrawal from Carentan as professionally competent execution of impossible mission. His regiment was assigned to hold town against overwhelming force. They held for 8 days instead of 3 days, Americans expected. They extracted 60% of remaining force successfully. By military standards, this is success within failure, competence demonstrated through mitigation of catastrophe. But von der Heydt also acknowledges that competent defense of doomed position serves limited strategic purpose. Delaying Americans by 5 days simply meant German forces further inland had 5 additional days to prepare defenses that would also eventually fail. The mathematics of attrition warfare favor the side with more resources, and Germany's resources were depleting while America's were increasing. Professional soldiers understand this intellectually while struggling to reconcile it emotionally with concepts of duty and honor that demand fighting even when winning is impossible. The escape from Carentan becomes legend in German military circles, story of professional competence under impossible circumstances. Von der Heydt becomes example of commander who maintained discipline, extracted forces successfully, preserved unit for future operations. But legends serve psychological needs more than historical accuracy. The truth is simpler and less dramatic. German soldiers retreated because staying meant dying for no strategic gain, and even the most dedicated soldiers eventually recognized futility. The escape was competent, but the battle was lost. The regiment survived, but Carentan fell. The withdrawal was textbook perfect and completely irrelevant to strategic outcome. History remembers the escape as minor tactical success within larger strategic defeat. Footnote to larger story of how Germany lost France, battle by battle, retreat by retreat, until no defensible positions remained, and the only retreat led back to Germany itself. Afternoon, June 14th, 1944. Burial detail. Private Eugene Rowe, medic who has spent 8 days treating wounded and watching men die, now helps bury them in temporary cemetery outside Carentan. 43 American dead laid in rows, each wrapped in shelter half or parachute silk, whatever fabric is available to provide dignity, death usually denies. Rowe moves from body to body, helping lift, helping lower into earth. That already holds too many soldiers from too many wars. Some faces are peaceful. Death arrives so quickly they never had time to fear it. Others look terrified, expressions frozen in final moments that Rowe will see in nightmares for the rest of his life. He doesn't cry, can't cry, has seen too much for tears, reached place beyond emotion where you simply function because stopping means breaking and breaking means being unable to help the living who still need you. June 15th. Roll call in Easy Company, 506th Parachute Infantry Regiment. The company assembled in England with 139 men. They jumped into France 9 days ago. 74 men answer roll call, 65 casualties in 9 days, 47% of the company, some wounded, will return to duty. Most won't. The mathematics are brutal, but the human reality is worse. Squads that trained together for months have lost half their members. Fire teams designed for 4 men now operate with 2. Platoons designed for 40 men now field 20. The tactical implications are obvious. Under-strength units are less combat effective, but the emotional implications resist measurement. How do you maintain cohesion when half your friends are dead or wounded? How do you trust relationships when experience proves everyone is temporary? June 16th. First hot meal since June 5th. 11 days of cold rations and whatever could be scrounged from abandoned buildings. Army cooks set up field kitchens and serve stew that's more potatoes than meat, but it's hot and plentiful. And soldiers eat like they're starving because they are starving. Not literally, but in the way that extended combat depletes body and spirit until basic comforts feel transcendent. But nobody talks. Soldiers sit in foxholes or against buildings or on on rubble piles, eating in silence, staring at nothing. The silence isn't peaceful. It's exhausted, the silence of people who've experienced things they can't articulate and wouldn't want to if they could. Food disappears without conversation or expression. Functional consumption divorced from pleasure. June 17th, Captain Richard Winters writes letter home, preserved in archives that will be studied by historians decades later. The handwriting is careful, controlled, but the content reveals struggles that control can't quite contain. We took the town, he writes. I don't know what it cost us yet. Maybe too much, maybe not enough. I don't know how to think about it. The letter continues for 2 pages, describing small details, weather, food quality, physical condition, while avoiding description of combat itself. What he doesn't write speaks louder than what he does. He doesn't describe the fighting, can't describe it or won't describe it, or knows that describing it would hurt his family more than silence does. The letter ends with a sentence that captures everything he can't say. When this is over, I'll try to explain, but I don't think I'll be able to. He seals the letter and sends it home to people who love him but cannot understand what he's become. June 18th through 20th, battalion aid stations report 34 soldiers evacuated with combat exhaustion, the military's clinical term for psychological breakdown that renders soldiers unable to function. 34 men who haven't been physically wounded but whose minds have broken under stress that exceeds human capacity to endure. They shake uncontrollably. They can't sleep or can't wake. They stare without seeing. They cry without knowing why. Some will recover with rest and treatment. Others will carry this damage for life. Invisible wounds that don't qualify for Purple Hearts but disable as completely as missing limbs. The 34 evacuated represent those whose breakdowns are visible enough to warrant medical intervention. How many others are breaking more quietly, maintaining functional appearance while something essential inside them cracks? Final casualty accounting provides numbers that abstract horror into statistics. 826 American soldiers killed, wounded, or missing in Carentan operations June 6th through 13th. The number is precise. Military bureaucracy demands precision, but precision obscures reality. Each number represents a life ended or permanently altered. Family receiving telegram, future cancelled. Breaking the number down by unit reveals differential suffering. 2nd Battalion 500 2nd PIR took 52% casualties. 1st Battalion 506th PIR took 45% casualties. Easy Company alone lost 47%. Some companies were luckier, some unluckier. Randomness determining who lives and dies in ways that training and competence cannot fully mitigate. German casualties estimated at over 2,000 killed, wounded, or captured tells parallel story of suffering distributed differently but equivalently devastating. The disparity, 826 American versus 2,000 German, seems to favor Americans, until you remember that Americans were attacking prepared defenses, which doctrine suggests should produce 3-to-1 casualties in defenders' favor. The actual 2-to-1 ratio in Americans' favor reflects overwhelming superiority in artillery, air power, logistics. It also reflects German determination to defend despite impossible odds, extracting maximum cost from attackers even when defense was futile. Both sides paid prices measured in young men who will never grow old, futures cancelled, families broken. Replacement soldiers begin arriving June 18th, 600 new paratroopers distributed among units of 101st Airborne Division. They're fresh from training, physically fit, eager to prove themselves. Veterans regard them with complex emotions, relief that manpower is being restored, contempt for inexperience, protectiveness toward innocence about to be lost, resentment toward those who haven't yet suffered. The replacements don't understand why veterans are cold toward them, why integration into units is awkward and painful. They'll understand within days when they experience their first combat and realize the distance between training and reality cannot be measured in miles or hours, but only in experiences that transform humans in ways training never does. Combat effectiveness assessments conducted by battalion commanders conclude that affected units are operating at 60 to 70% of doctrinal effectiveness due to casualties, fatigue, and psychological strain. These percentages attempt to quantify readiness, but they're rough estimates of something that resists quantification. How do you measure whether soldiers will follow orders under fire? Whether units will maintain cohesion when attacked? Whether individuals will continue functioning despite terror and exhaustion? The assessments are necessary for operational planning. Commanders need to know what their units can do, but the precision of percentages implies measurement accuracy that doesn't exist when measuring human will to continue. Fighting. July 1st, 17 days after Carentan's capture, marks point when units involved in battle have cycled through enough rest, replacement, and reorganization to be considered reconstituted. But reconstitution is administrative concept, not emotional reality. The soldiers who fought at Carentan carry experiences that won't fade through rest or dilute with replacement soldiers. They've learned things about themselves, about warfare, about randomness of survival that cannot be unlearned. Some have discovered reserves of courage they didn't know they possessed. Others have discovered limits they wish they hadn't found. Most have learned that valor and victory don't prevent nightmares, that winning battles doesn't feel triumphant when you're standing in cemetery burying friends, that the price of strategic success is paid by individuals who receive no strategic benefits from their sacrifice. The aftermath of Carentan reveals truth about combat that civilian society rarely acknowledges. Victory and trauma are not opposites, but often coexist. American soldiers won the battle, achieved strategic objective, performed with competence and courage. They also experienced horrors that will haunt them for decades, watched friends die in ways they cannot forget, discovered that winning feels empty when the cost is measured in the specific faces you remember from training camps and transport ships and moments before they died. The parades and medals and official histories will celebrate Carentan as victory. The soldiers who fought there will remember it as weak when they learned that victory tastes like ash and feels like exhaustion and sounds like silence of too many empty bunks where friends once slept. Both realities are true simultaneously, and reconciling them requires psychological sophistication that 19 and 20-year-old soldiers rarely possess. So they carry both realities, the official story and the personal truth, and try to build lives on foundations cracked by experiences civilian world cannot understand and military culture cannot fully acknowledge. This is victory's price. Not just casualties counted in official reports, but wounds that resist documentation and healing that never fully completes. 1946, Fort Leavenworth, Kansas, U.S. Army Historical Division completes classified review of Normandy operations, including detailed analysis of Carentan battle. The report's conclusion is diplomatic enough for official documentation while blunt enough to serve its purpose. Tactical execution was improvised and costly, strategic objective achieved despite, not because of operational planning. The language is bureaucratic, but the criticism is clear. The battle succeeded, but it succeeded through soldier initiative and overwhelming material advantage rather than brilliant planning or tactical innovation. Casualties were triple initial estimates, timeline was 4 days behind schedule, coordination between units was minimal. The victory was real but expensive, purchased through advantages in artillery and determination rather than operational excellence. 1954, Fort Benning, Georgia. Colonel Robert Sink, now retired, sits for official history interview, defending decisions made 10 years earlier, under circumstances reviewers can only imagine. His defense is unapologetic. We didn't have time for a perfect plan. War is about making decisions with incomplete information and accepting the consequences. He walks interviewer through his reasoning. German reinforcements were approaching. Waiting meant facing stronger enemy. Attacking immediately meant fighting only current defenders. Speed mattered more than perfect preparation. Each point is logical, defensible, grounded in military theory. But the interviewer presses on casualty numbers, on 42% losses in 506 Regiment. Sink's response is quieter but no less firm. Every man who died in Carentan died so that thousands more wouldn't die later when German reinforcements arrived. That's command. That's war. It's terrible and it's necessary. 1962, General Maxwell Taylor publishes memoir titled The Uncertain Trumpet, indirectly addressing Carentan in sections on airborne operations and command philosophy. He never mentions Sink by name, never explicitly criticizes the Carentan assault, but his arguments for more deliberate application of firepower before commitment of infantry are clearly informed by watching Sink's regiment take heavy casualties. Taylor's philosophy emphasizes combined arms coordination, artillery preparation, methodical advances that minimize casualties through overwhelming supporting fires. The contrast with Sink's aggressive approach is implicit but unmistakable. Taylor is arguing that alternative approach might have achieved same objective with fewer casualties, that patience can be tactical virtue, that commanders should prioritize protecting their soldiers even when strategic pressure demands speed. 1984, military historian S.L.A. Marshall publishes posthumous analysis identifying Carentan as testing ground for urban warfare lessons that saved lives at Aachen, Cologne, and beyond. Marshall's argument is that costly initial battles teach lessons that reduce casualties in subsequent operations, making early losses investments in future survival. Carentan taught importance of tank infantry coordination in urban terrain, value of mouse-holing through buildings, necessity of combined arms in city fighting. These lessons, documented and distributed through doctrine updates, influenced how American forces fought in every subsequent urban battle of European war. By this calculation, 826 casualties at Carentan potentially prevented thousands of casualties in later battles where improved doctrine kept soldiers alive. The argument is compelling if you can accept that some soldiers must die teaching lessons that save other soldiers, that learning in warfare requires blood tuition. 2004, Carentan, France. Veterans Reunion marks 60th anniversary of the battle, bringing together American survivors now in their 80s. They gather in Town Square, where they fought 6 decades earlier, sharing memories that have been polished by repetition and softened by time. But underneath the nostalgia lies unresolved tension about whether the battle was fought correctly, whether casualties were justified, whether alternative approaches might have succeeded with less cost. One veteran argues they did what needed doing, period. No second-guessing from comfort of retrospection. Another quietly suggests that maybe waiting 3 days for more artillery support would have been wise, that speed cost lives unnecessarily. They don't resolve the argument because the argument is unresolvable, rooted in counterfactuals that cannot be tested and values that differ between individuals. Strategic success metrics provide one framework for evaluation. Objective achieved, Carentan captured, beachhead unified. Timeline acceptable 4-day delay compared to alternative scenarios where delay could have been weeks if German reinforcements arrived first. Allied advance proceeded as planned. Unified beachhead enabled subsequent operations that led to breakout from Normandy and liberation of France. By these measures, Carentan was unqualified success, strategic objective achieved at acceptable cost. 826 casualties seems high until compared to alternatives like indefinite division of beachhead, German counterattack into the gap, potential failure of entire invasion. Strategic calculus sometimes requires accepting terrible costs because alternatives are worse. Tactical failure metrics tell different story. 826 casualties versus original estimate of 200 to 300 represents planning failure, intelligence failure, doctrine failure. Improvised coordination instead of planned combined arms suggests inadequate preparation. 24 documented friendly fire incidents indicate communication failures that killed Americans with American weapons. Unit-level casualty rates approaching 50% rendered some units combat ineffective by doctrinal standards. The tactical execution was improvised, chaotic, costly in ways that better planning might have mitigated. Arguing that strategic success excuses tactical failures becomes argument about whether ends justify means, whether commanders should be judged by outcomes or methods. Alternative scenario analysis attempts to answer unanswerable question. What if Americans had waited 3 days for full artillery and armor support before attacking? The scenario posits reduced infantry casualties through overwhelming firepower, but also risks German reinforcement that would have made the battle exponentially harder. Analysts estimate 3-day delay might have reduced American casualties by 200 to 400 soldiers, but risked 17th SS Panzergrenadier Division arriving in strength and turning battle from difficult to potentially catastrophic. The calculation requires weighting certain casualties against possible future casualties, present costs against hypothetical alternatives. Military planning involves these calculations constantly, choosing between bad options because good options don't exist. Comparative context situates Carentan within broader Normandy campaign. Casualty rate of 38% for engaged units was high, but not exceptional. Sunlow battle produced 41% casualties, Brest 23%, Cherbourg 19%. Carentan was harder than some battles, easier than others, roughly average for urban warfare in 1944. This comparison neither justifies nor condemns the casualties, but provides context that crude numbers alone cannot supply. Every battle cost lives. Some battles were necessary, some were avoidable. Carentan was strategically necessary, tactically improvised, costly in ways that planning might have reduced but couldn't have eliminated entirely. Long-term doctrinal impact provides another evaluation metric. Carentan lessons directly influenced 37 official doctrine updates distributed through First Army during 1944 and 45. Tank infantry coordination protocols, urban warfare techniques, artillery employment procedures, casualty evacuation methods, all refined based on Carentan experience. These improvements measurably reduce casualties in subsequent battles, though quantifying the reduction requires counterfactual analysis of how many soldiers would have died without the improvements. If doctrine changes save 2,000 lives in later battles, does this justify 826 casualties at Carentan? The utilitarian calculation is cold but unavoidable. Some learning requires experience. Experience in warfare requires casualties. And the question is whether the knowledge gained justifies the price paid. The debate ultimately resists resolution because it rests on values that differ between evaluators and circumstances that cannot be recreated. Was Carentan worth 826 American lives? The answer depends on whether you prioritize strategic success, tactical execution, casualty minimization, or speed of operation. It depends on whether you're evaluating from perspective of strategic planners, tactical commanders, individual soldiers, or civilian society. It depends on whether you believe commanders should accept casualties for strategic objectives or minimize casualties even at cost of delayed success. Every perspective is defensible, none is complete. The debate continues in military academies and history journals because the underlying question, what price is acceptable for strategic success, cannot be answered objectively when the price is measured in human lives and strategic success is measured in maps and timelines. Carentan was necessary, costly, successful, improvised, terrible, and instrumental to invasion's ultimate success. All these statements are simultaneously true, and reconciling them requires moral sophistication that simple narratives of victory or failure cannot provide. The battle was worth it, and too expensive and unavoidable and poorly executed and strategically successful and tactically flawed, and perhaps that's the only honest assessment possible when evaluating events where humans made impossible choices under extreme conditions with information they didn't have and consequences they couldn't fully predict. 1984, Carentan, France, 40 years after liberation. The town dedicates Dead Man's Corner Museum at exact location where 2nd Battalion, 506th Regiment fought off German counterattack on Bloody Gulch. The museum occupies farmhouse that served as American aid station, building where medics operated on wounded while fighting raged 100 yards away. Michel Detrez, French historian and museum founder, has spent 5 years collecting artifacts, American helmets and German rifles, photographs and personal letters, uniforms and equipment from both sides. The collection includes French civilian artifacts too, a child's toy recovered from rubble, a family photograph salvaged from destroyed home, everyday objects transformed into historical testimony by violence that swept through this place. The museum's purpose is preservation but also reconciliation, acknowledging that soldiers from all sides were human beings caught in machinery of war larger than individual choice. June 6, 2004, 60th anniversary of D-Day, brings together American and German veterans of Carentan, battle for commemorative ceremony in town square. 80-year-old men who shot at each other across these same streets 6 decades earlier now embrace, plant peace, garden together, acknowledge shared humanity that war temporarily obscured. The ceremony is emotionally complex. Survivors celebrating survival while remembering those who didn't survive. Former enemies recognizing that soldiers on both sides were following orders and fighting for causes they believed in. An American veteran, speaking through translator, tells his German counterpart, "We were both doing our duty." The German veteran responds, "Yes, and I'm grateful we both survived to meet as friends." The exchange seems almost trite, except that these men earned the right to this sentiment through experiences most people cannot imagine. 2015, Fort Benning, Georgia. U.S. Army Infantry School conducts advanced urban warfare course using Carentan as primary case study. Instructors walk students through the battle chronologically, analyzing tactical decisions, identifying both successful innovations and costly mistakes. The course teaches mouse-holing techniques first developed at Carentan, tank infantry coordination protocols refined through Carentan casualties, urban assault procedures codified after Carentan analysis. Students study after-action reports, examine photographs, review casualty statistics. The battle fought in 1944 continues teaching in 2015, lessons transmitted across generations through institutional memory that transforms blood and sacrifice into knowledge and doctrine. Officers learning these lessons will command soldiers in Fallujah, Mosul, urban battles that bear superficial resemblance to Carentan, despite separated by 70 years and technological revolutions. 2019, Carentan. Annual D-Day Festival draws 10,000 attendees to town, with population of 6,000. Reenactors dressed in period uniforms recreate battles in fields outside town, while authentic buildings still bear shrapnel scars preserved as historical markers. The festival is simultaneously commemoration and commercialization, respectful remembrance mixed with tourist attraction. French children sell American flags and German helmets to visitors who photograph everything. Veterans who can still travel, sit in honored positions, aging survivors become living links to history that grows more distant annually. The last American veteran of Carentan battle will die later this year, aged 95, ending direct human connection to events that will survive only in recorded testimony and institutional memory. Physical legacy remains visible throughout Carentan for those who know where to look. 23 buildings still have visible battle damage, bullet scars in stone walls, missing chunks of masonry from artillery hits, repaired sections where walls were breached. Town Square features memorials to American soldiers, German soldiers, and French civilians who died here, each memorial acknowledging different perspectives on the same violence. The Church of Notre Dame, damaged during battle, has been restored but preserves one shell hole in exterior wall as reminder. Liberation Route walking tour marks 63 strategic points with bilingual plaques describing what happened at each location. 30,000 people annually walk this route, following paths that soldiers fought across, standing in locations where specific battles occurred, trying to imagine what cannot be fully imagined from safety of peacetime. Documentary preservation ensures voices of participants survive beyond their lifetimes. 127 personal accounts archived in various institutions, oral histories recorded with veterans, written memoirs published and unpublished, letters sent home during and after battle, after-action reports filed by commanders, 1,400 photographs preserved in military archives and private collections, images capturing moments from aerial reconnaissance to individual soldier portraits to aftermath devastation. These documentary sources provide raw material for historical analysis, but also serve more fundamental purpose, ensuring that individual experiences aren't lost to abstract narratives about strategy and casualties. The archive preserves voices of medics and riflemen, tank crews and civilians, commanders and privates, giving texture to history that statistics alone cannot provide. Ongoing archaeological discoveries demonstrate that history remains literally buried beneath present-day Carentan. 2022, construction crew excavating for new building, foundation unearths unexploded 75mm artillery shell, requiring evacuation of city block, while ordnance disposal team handles removal. This happens several times per year. Construction projects revealing ammunition, personal effects, human remains that were missed during immediate post-battle recovery. Each discovery triggers protocol involving archaeologists, historians, military authorities. French law requires that battlefield discoveries be documented and preserved when historically significant or handled appropriately when they're dangerous. The buried artifacts serve as physical reminder that war's effects extend beyond immediate violence into permanent alteration of landscape that holds evidence for generations. Sister city programs link Carentan with American towns, formal relationships that sustain transatlantic connections forged through historical accident of geography and warfare. Salisbury, North Carolina, and York, Pennsylvania maintain sister city partnerships with Carentan, facilitating cultural exchanges, student programs, annual delegations. French students visit American towns to study English and American history. American students visit Carentan to learn French and examine World War II history in location where it occurred. These programs serve educational purposes, but also deeper function of sustaining memory and relationship across generations, separated from original events by decades. The teenagers participating in exchange programs weren't born until 65 years after the battle, but they inherit responsibility for maintaining connections their grandparents' generation established. Annual June 13th ceremonies mark Liberation Anniversary with formality that might seem excessive, except that formality serves function of ensuring remembrance when participants and witnesses have died. French officials, American diplomats, military representatives gather in town square each year. Wreaths are laid at memorials, names of dead are read aloud, national anthems play. The ceremony follows script established decades ago, ritual that persists, because ritual provides framework for emotions that resist articulation. Those attending are mostly people with no direct connection to battle, descendants of participants, history enthusiasts, tourists who happen to be present. But their attendance matters, because memory requires witnesses, and when original witnesses die, subsequent generations must become witnesses to the witnessing, maintaining chains of remembrance that stretch backward to events none of them experienced firsthand. What does honouring battle mean when those who fought it have died? The question troubles historians and community leaders as last veterans pass away. Is celebration appropriate? Should emphasis shift from honouring combatants to mourning victims? How to maintain authentic memory without mythologizing violence? Carentan has navigated these questions through emphasis on multiple perspectives. American, German, French civilian, each acknowledged in permanent memorials and annual ceremonies. The town's approach suggests that honouring battle means acknowledging complexity, recognising multiple truths that coexist uncomfortably, refusing to reduce historical events to simplistic narratives of heroism or tragedy. It means preserving evidence, maintaining testimony, creating space for continued examination and reinterpretation as each generation brings new questions to old events. The legacy of Carentan exists in physical structures and archived documents, in doctrine taught at military schools and ceremonies conducted annually, in personal memories fading as veterans age, and institutional memories maintained through deliberate effort. But the deepest legacy may be the question the battle poses about the price of necessary wars, and whether that price can ever be fully calculated. 826 Americans died or were wounded taking this town. 2,000 Germans died or were wounded defending it. 143 French civilians died caught between them. These numbers are precise, documented, indisputable. What they mean, whether they represent acceptable costs for strategic necessity or tragic waste or unavoidable consequence of total war, remains unresolved because the question admits no objective answer. The Battle of Carentan ended in June 1944, but its questions persist into present and future, each generation required to evaluate anew what price is acceptable when freedom requires fighting and fighting